Good afternoon, all. My name is Reem Henry. I'm a wireline and perforation field engineer for Halliburton. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar with Dr. Moustafa Oraby. We're very lucky to have Dr. Moustafa with us today. Dr. Moustafa Oraby has 25 years experience in petroleum industry. He holds a PhD degree from North Carolina State University in the United States of America and a master's degree and bachelor degree from Alexandria. Dr. Oraby also joined Alexandria University in his early career as an assistant lecturer till he obtained his master's degree. He also used to teach at community colleges in the United States in the industry. Dr. Oraby held many positions in all aspects of petroleum industry and lived in many countries around the globe. I personally have my notepad and pen ready to learn from Dr. Oraby because it's a great opportunity that we have you, sir, with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Should I start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Rem, please, can you please, if you have any question that you think it's related, and I need to answer the question while I'm giving the webinar, just please interrupt me and,
Sure.
and let me know what the question is.
Sure.
Right. Okay. So today we're going to talk about multiple subjects that these subjects are actually all related together. If you still recall the first webinar I shared with you guys, which is the introduction to the petroleum industry, the first important thing that the industry has so many operations, so many links, and all of these are all connected together. Nothing is separated. Nobody can work in isolation. We all have to talk to each other. We all use each other's output and we all give each other input. So it's very important to learn this from the start before you even start your career in the industry. Okay? I will try to stress on this also how the link between the reservoir rock properties and the formation evaluation, how this actually links together. I'll start with the reservoir evaluation steps. Let me just not sell the American University in Cairo, but actually in the American University in Cairo, for the formation evaluation or the reservoir evaluation, we actually give more than one course. And all these courses are linked together. Okay? So in the reservoir evaluation, you have three major inputs. Every input provides what's needed to the next one. Okay? So if I look at him here, the first input is reservoir rock properties. You cannot isolate reservoir rock properties from the reservoir evaluation. You cannot do the evaluation out of logs or out of your information from the geology or from whatever nearby fields, whatever information you get. You have to actually link the reservoir rock properties. The rock properties is the controller of even how your tools, how your logs, how your evaluation will be directed to. So reservoir rock property is very, very important. The next step is the formation evaluation. You cannot do formation evaluation before you understand fully the reservoir rock properties. You cannot actually start doing any analysis using any logs without understanding the reservoir rock properties. Today, you're going to see the link between all these parameters altogether. The third input is the reservoir characterization, which we call it the RC. RC is the last end. You cannot do the RC without having knowledge on the formation evaluation. You have knowledge from the reservoir rock properties, all connected, all together. So the first one gives the second one, and the second one gives the third one, until you get a loop. This loop will provide you with what is the conventional reservoir analysis. When I say conventional, because we spent one other lecture talking about the unconventional, which we talked about as a different perception, different evaluation, different understanding of, or different than the conventional analysis. So from the conventional reservoir, we look at porosity. Actually, people, when you start looking at porosity, the next step will be called saturation. No, you cannot jump from porosity to saturation direct. Not at all. That's not the sequence of events actually that happens. Porosity has to be followed by permeability. Permeability has to be followed by wettability. Wettability has to be followed by the cap pressure. Cap pressure followed by the saturation. Saturation does not come right after porosity. This is a mistake that many people actually, even when we teach formation evaluation, we teach porosity, then we jump to water saturation. That's not the right sequence of events. Okay, so porosity is very much controlling permeability. We'll talk about this in some details today. What is the link? If there's a link between porosity and permeability, what is it? Who worked on this? Who put the basis of porosity permeability? If there is any relationship, we will come to the conclusion today. Is there a relationship between porosity and permeability or not? Then wettability. And what is wettability? And why wettability is included in the evaluation? What is the role of wettability? How the wettability will control even my expectation of production. Wettability and production are very, very much related. Cap pressure, capillary pressure, and how the capillary pressure controls even the understanding of my reservoir. So many parameters before you even talk about saturation. We have to understand all these parameters all together. Then once you started in saturation, we start talking about fluids. When you talk about fluids, then the relative permeability comes in. So the relative permeability comes after the saturation. So as you see, you cannot jump from one to the other because you're studying a certain subject. Everything is linked together and everything is very much dependent on each other. So what is the role of the reservoir rock property? Reservoir rock properties will get this from the core. Okay, and every well, every field, when we start the first well, we actually take a full core. That's what we call it the exploration well. Exploration well, we have to cut core from exploration well. And from the core data, we actually take core plugs. I'm not going to go into details in this, but you take the core and you slab it, and you get the geologist or geologist will come in and try to choose some core plugs. Core plugs that you choose is not a random choice, and is not also a certain step choice. It's not every foot you take a plug. It's not every half a foot you take a plug. No. The plug is actually taken based on the variability of your reservoir. You take a plug here, probably after 2 feet, you take another plug because there is a change. There is a reason why you take a plug from this zone and you take a plug from a different zone. So the plugs are not in an equal step. Plugs are selected based on variability, based on the positional environment that the geologist will see a good reason to take a plug. Because every plug that you will take, you will do measurements on. Measurements have cost. And we, in our industry, cost is controlling what we do. Okay, sometimes you need to do few things, but you cannot do because the cost is high. Unless you have a good reason to justify to your manager, I need to do this because of that. Then he will agree on it if you actually convince him that this is very important. Okay? So actually take plugs from the core, then we do measurements. But the problem with the core measurement is it's very limited data. As I said, you take plugs not in an equal steps. You take plugs whenever the geologists see a good reason to take a plug. So you don't have a continuous measurement. So this means that you are not really having a full understanding of the total zone of interest that you have, because your plugs are not covering the total zone. You take a plug from here, 2-3 feet, and a plug from there, 5 feet, a plug from here, and that's actually doesn't cover the full zone that you are interested in. The other thing that's more important than these two, it's not actually real time. You take the core, you have to send the core to the core lab, they slab it, they take the plugs, they started doing the measurement. We'll talk about a month, sometimes 2 months to get the data back. The rig is not going to stand waiting for you to get the data back and you do your completion of a well. It's not gonna, it doesn't work this way. Okay, 2 months from a rig time, it will never, nobody will accept that. So one of the major drawback of the reservoir rock properties from the core is actually it's not a real time data. And sometimes you have to have real time data while the rig is there to say are we going to continue drilling? We need to stop here. That's enough for this well. Should I put the casing down? Should I do the cementing, plug the well and move away? Many decisions that you need to make based on data that you have. If the data going to be late because it's in core data and the core data takes a long time to do the measurement on, that's not going to be a good way of doing it. So reservoir rock properties tell us the reality, the ground truth, as they say, but it has some limitation that we cannot rely heavily on every well on taking core or making core measure. That will take us to the formation evaluation. Formation evaluation, you measure the same parameters that you obtain from the reservoir rock property. So all the parameters that you obtain from the reservoir rock, from the core, you actually get it from the logging data. But it's not a one-to-one. It means I do not measure porosity from logging tools. Logging tool does not measure porosity. Logging tool measures something that relates to porosity. We spent a full webinar talking about this. Okay? When we talked about porosity, we said we measure something that relates to porosity, which is the hydrogen. We'll review this when we reach to that level in this webinar. Okay? So we are not really measuring porosity. We are not measuring permeability. We are not measuring water saturation. We measure certain parameters that relates to these parameters. And it's up to us to take these parameters and get the relationship clear and calculate what we need to calculate from it. Okay? So this is not on an actual core. It's actually tools that measure certain parameters that relates to the property that we need to measure. But it has an advantage is because it's unlimited data. All right? We take this every quarter of a foot. We can take it every tenth of a meter. It's up to you. Okay? So we actually can determine if I can go for much higher resolution. There are tools with a higher resolution. So it depends the amount of data that you have. Huge amount of data. So it's not limited data as you see in the reservoir rock property. So this is the advantage of the formation evaluation tools, the logging tools. It's unlimited data that you actually have, and you have it also in real time. So that's a big advantage. Unlimited data or real time, so you can actually have a decision made on the spot when the rig is on, and you can decide what's the next step that you need to do. So formation evaluation is the one that we take the decisions on. Okay. And once we get 1 well, 2 wells, 3 wells, and we get the core data back, then we tie in and we see how things are related. So this is a big advantage for the formation evaluation. With one single disadvantage, we are not measuring the actual property. We're measuring something that relates to this actual property, and we have to translate this, find this relationship, and correlate to come up with the property that we need to measure. Okay. For the formation evaluation, it's a single well. Single well means when you go and you do the logging, you log this well. So you can see the data from this well. Right? So it's a single well relationship. Now, if I need to look at the total reservoir, I have now 20, 30, 50, 100 wells. Then I have to go to the next step, which is the reservoir characterization. So reservoir characterization is not a single well. Reservoir characterization is multi-well. So the reservoir characterization combines the logging tools and combines the core data on multiple field data. It's a field evaluation. So the characterization is not a single well evaluation. You cannot do that. Okay, from the formation evaluation, look at the single well, you build certain, for the formation evaluation, look at something called cross plots. You do the cross plot for a single well, but when you do the cross plot here for characterization, you do it for multi-well. Big difference when you look at a multi-well versus looking at a single well. Plus, one very important thing in the characterization is the field statistics. Quite frankly, statistics is very, very important. Till today, I have a problem with many students. They have no idea what statistics are. They cannot even define the mean or the standard deviation. You guys don't have this type of understanding. Please, if you take statistics in your school, go ahead and review the statistics. It's very, very important to understand how to come up with the statistics, how to look at the variogram, how to look at the histogram, how to build the histogram, what is the definition of standard deviation, what's the definition of mean. They are very important if you really want to be a good reservoir characterization engineer, okay? Because the statistics in a reservoir is very, very crucial. So you can see now how all of these are related together. Each one has its own function. And for you to combine all this information together to come up with a bigger picture, which is the reservoir characterization. That's for the conventional reservoir. We talked about the unconventional reservoir before, and we said this is completely different definitions and different way of looking at data, and that's how the whole world now is looking at for future type of production. But that's not in today's webinar. We're not going to talk about this at all in today's webinar. We actually spent a full webinar on the unconventional reservoir. Okay, so this is the first slide to just talk about what are the inputs as an evaluation steps, or as in reservoir evaluation steps. What are the inputs required, and we need to talk about each input separate now and understand what the link between all these inputs together. Okay. Okay. So let's just start talking about the conventional reservoir evaluation. When we start about talking about conventional reservoir evaluation, first one that comes to our mind is porosity. Why? Porosity is the container where my fluid will be living in. We all after fluids in the pores. If there are no pores, no fluids, then walk away. There is no reservoir. Very simple. So the most important parameter for us all is, does this zone have porosity or not? So once we all agree that porosity is the number one or the first parameter that we all need to look at, then we need to understand what is porosity. What is porosity and what are the limits of my porosity? What is the minimum value of porosity and what's the maximum value of porosity? What are the conditions for minimum value and maximum value? Well, minimum value for anybody who is looking for a physical parameter, the minimum value is 0. We're not going to disagree on this. But the maximum value is the one. What is the maximum value of our porosity? Minimum value is 0. That's no argument in this. Now we need to find out what is the maximum value. Maximum value comes from an ideal case. Okay? And I want you guys not to memorize anything. Just really think about it this way. All right? What is an ideal case? Ideal case means a case that will never happen in nature. If it will never happen in nature, then the outcome of this ideal case is the maximum value, right? Because it will never happen. If it will never happen, so I can take it as maximum value. Okay. So how can I get an ideal case which is the maximum value? There are multiple conditions for this. And if you look at the conditions one by one and we understand why you are putting these conditions together, we understand why we call this one the maximum porosity. The first condition is your pores is composed by grains. This is the first thing. Your pores are composed by arrangement of grains, which we call them in geology sorting. When the grains are sorted in a way, they actually create pores in between. Okay, for the pore to be idealistic, then I need to put a condition for the grain. The grain has to be spherical in shape. Okay, so the first step is not an irregular shape. It has to be spherical in shape. Somebody will say, okay, why is not cubical in shape? I'll tell you why it's not cubical in shape. It has to be spherical. Why is it spherical? Because before we say because, the first thing is it has to be spherical. The second one, all of them are identical. It means all the grains are spherical. All the grains have the same volume. All the grains have the same radius. Will you find this in nature? No way. You cannot find this in nature. But that's the condition for maximum porosity. Okay? So to get a maximum porosity, your grains has to be spherical and your grains has to be identical. Now, if I arrange sphere over each other, what is the value of having that spherical shape? Well, if you arrange them over each other, they will touch in a point. So that's why it's not a cubicle. Because if you arrange cubicle over each other, they actually contact in an area, right? Spheres, they contact in a single point. So it's not gonna take volume from you. It will give you the maximum vacancies between the grains. Okay, so that's why everybody assumes to get a maximum porosity, your grains have to be spherical in shape. They all have to be identical also. Okay, so spherical and identical means when they contact in a single point that point is not going to take out of your porosity at all. But if it's not a single point, it will take an area, and the area will take out of your porosity, to some out of your porosity. Okay? So the first condition, spherical in shape. Second, identical. All of them are the same. Okay? Third is you arrange them in a cubicle. A cubicle is the simplest structure in nature. And you've actually arranged 8 of them, 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom. That actually generates a cubicle. That cubicle, because all of them are identical, all of them are spherical, that will give you the maximum porosity ever. So to get the maximum porosity ever, you have to put all these conditions together. Are these conditions actually, you can find this in nature? No way. That's why this is my upper limit. So my lower limit, we agree on, it's 0. My upper limit is the porosity that will be created or generated by this type of structure and these type of conditions. Okay? All right. If I take this and let's calculate what the maximum porosity look like. First of all, here is the first grain. Then the second grain comes in as a deposition. They will touch in a single point. Then you see layers after layers. Now, if they touch in a single point, what is the distance between the center of each sphere? Here is an R and R, so the distance between the center of the sphere is 2R, right? Now, if you go for the second row, here is your second row. Your second row will also touch in points, and each one of these will also have a 2R side, okay? So if you take 4 of them, you will create a square. Each square will have a 2R side. Now, if I take these and generate the cubical structure, here is my cubical structure, right? Now, if I look at the cubical structure, and if you connect the centers of between all these spheres, then I will create from 8 grains, I will create a cube. The cube side is 2R. So it's a cube between the centers, and that inside the cube, you will see that the porosity that's created by this structure. Okay? So if I have a cube with a side of 2R, then the volume of my cube is 2R cubed, which is 8R cubed. Each one of these grains is actually contributing with 1/8, because I have 8 of here. 1/8 from this sphere, 1/8 from that sphere, and so on. So each sphere will contribute 1/8 of a sphere in that cube. Okay? All right. So each grain will contribute 1/8 in the cube shape. All right. So this means 1/8 from each of them, and the number is 8. 8 times 1/8. This means all of them will contribute as one single grain. Okay. So the 8 grains, each one is contributing with 1/8. So the 8 grains will contribute with 1 full grain. So the solids inside my cube is 1 full grain size. Okay. And what's my grain size? It's a sphere. What is the volume of a sphere? Volume of a sphere is 4 pi third pi r cube. So it's 4 third pi r cube is my volume of the sphere. Understood? So now I created a cube. That cube is actually composed by grains, 8 of them. Each one of these grains is contributing with 1/8, and I have 8 of them. 8 times 1/8 is 1 full grain. So the volume of the cube is 8R cube, and the volume of the solid inside the cube is the contribution from each grain, which is a full grain, 4/3 pi r cube. Right? Great. So this is the total volume. This is the solid volume. If you have the total volume and you have the solid volume, so what is the volume of the other part that has no solids in there, which is, I don't want to say vacuum, but just call it vacuum for now. Okay. So what is the vacuum? What's the empty part of that cube? We just subtract these 2. So the rest of the cube is empty. So what that empty part? Just subtract 4/3 pi r cube from the 8R cube, gives you that part. That part which we call a pore volume. That's not porosity, by the way. Okay? Don't confuse yourself. that vacuum, that empty part is not your porosity. That's the pore volume. Okay, so the pore volume is the subtraction 8 r cubed minus the 4/3 by r cubed. So that's the pore volume. What is porosity? Porosity is the pore volume divided by the total volume. So the porosity is not the pore volume. It is the ratio between the pore volume divided by the total volume. So the porosity is pore volume divided by the total volume. What's the total volume? It's the volume of the cube. That's your total volume. Okay. So pore volume divided by the total volume. Here is my pore volume. I just calculated that. Divided this by the total volume, which is 8 r cubed. You can see r cubed here. You can see r cubed here. You can see r cubed there. You take this as a common r cubed. You cancel out with the r cubed at the denominator. Then you get 8 minus 4/5 divided by 8. If you do the math, it will give you 0.476. That's why my maximum porosity is 47.6%. So now with this very idealistic structure, which it doesn't happen in nature, okay? Let's just agree on this. So that's the idealistic structure. Doesn't happen in nature, but it gives you the maximum porosity ever, which is 47.6%. This means do not and will not expect that my porosity will be higher than this value. Everybody agree with this? Okay? Want to make sure that you all agree with that. No porosity will be higher than 47.6%. If I see any porosity is more than 47.6%, you have to find out why, because this is not real. Okay? Everybody understand? If for any reason you found anything that's showing porosity more than 47, actually 47.6 is to never happen anyway, because nature doesn't actually go this way. Okay? So 47.6, it will never reach that number. All right? That's why in logging, what are the limits of the logging porosity? It's from -15 to 45. Why we choose the 45? Because the maximum is 47.6, and it will never happen as 47.6. That's why we put the maximum on logging as 45 porosity. Okay, and we talked about the -15 before, and I don't think I have the time to talk about this again here. Okay, all right. Fine. We agreed on this. Now we know that the maximum porosity ever is what? Is 47.6. Okay. Let's just look at this. How about this log? Here is a log right there. And as we agreed, here is the porosity log, APLC. That's a Schlumberger. Sorry for Reem. It's a Schlumberger logging. Schlumberger logging is called the APS, or accelerated porosity sound. It's a neutron tool. From -15 to 45. Guys, we agreed the porosity cannot be what? Cannot be more than 47%. 47.6 to be exact. Okay? But I can see here porosity is really going much higher. Actually, it's chopped. So to show you this, I expanded that. I expanded that scale. And I put the scale from -15 to 70%. Look at the porosity here. It's reaching what? 70%. Is that possible? No. No, it cannot be. But the tool is reading 70%. But we know from the understanding of our rock that it will never happen. That cannot be. Something is wrong here. Or there is something else that we need to understand. Everybody understand that? That the limit that we put for our porosity is 47.6. Now the log is even reading as high as 70%. That doesn't make any sense. Right? Okay. So we have to have a good reason for this. We have to explain that somehow. All right? All right. Here is the 47.6 line, and you can see all these porosities are higher than 47.6%. And that doesn't make any sense. Okay? We need to understand what's happening here. What is going on in this log? Is it a bad log or something else? Okay? Is the company that they did this log did not actually calibrate their tools properly, or something else? Okay, because we cannot find and we cannot accept any porosity above 47. We cannot accept even that number by itself. But at least if we agree for some reason that it can be 47.6, it cannot exceed 47.6%. Right? Once you actually see this, you have to answer that question: what's wrong in this log, and why porosity is reading higher than the maximum? That's two questions are very important. Is the log wrong, or there is a good reason for this? Right? To actually look at this, we have to go back and step back and see how the neutron tool actually measures porosity. Okay? Remember when we started talking about the logging tools? Logging tools do not measure porosity. For example, the neutron tool does not measure porosity. What does the neutron tool measure, if you remember from the formation evaluation? It measures hydrogen. So every time the tool sees hydrogen, it will give you porosity. As simple as such. So the more hydrogen it sees, the more porosity it will give you. Okay? It doesn't really matter where the hydrogen lives for the neutron tool. It doesn't matter. It sees hydrogen. When it sees more hydrogen, it will give you higher porosity. If you remember this, the tool is composed of a neutron source and detectors. And the neutron source will emit high energy neutron and it will collide. Remember this thing that we spent some time talking about it? And actually, all neutrons will collide with hydrogen, and the hydrogen is the most effective atom that will slow down the neutrons. Actually, it kills the neutron and it loses all its energy. It can lose all its energy in one collision. So, and we actually put this: less hydrogen means low porosity. More hydrogen means high porosity. That's what we agreed on. So high porosity, low porosity does not mean high pores. No, it means high number of hydrogen atoms. Low porosity means low number of hydrogen atoms. That's what the tool actually measures. Okay? That's why I'm saying, guys, when you look at things, look at it from the understanding of it. The tool does not measure porosity. It measures something that relates to porosity, which is the hydrogen. Right? Okay. The neutron measures hydrogen. Hydrogen is translated to porosity. That's the concept of the neutron tool. All right. Let's just go back to the log here and find out what really went wrong. When you do this, first thing to look at is the caliper. Caliper will explain this to you. This is the first step. Why? Let's just look at the caliper here. Here is the caliper. My caliper is from 6 to 16. Remember when we studied the caliper? We said the caliper will give me what? Will give me the whole size. Okay, everybody understand that? Caliper will give me the whole size. If I look at the caliper from top to bottom, I can see the caliper looks very good at the bottom here. All right. If I actually look at the measurement of the caliper here, it will be 12.25. So this tool and this hole is 12.25 inch hole. But when it goes up, the caliper will go really bad and it can reach up to 16 inches. So you're drilling with 12.25, but at the upper section, you see more than 12.25. Okay. So this means if I put the 12.25 here, here is my 12.25 hole. So that hole is 12.25. It comes here and increases. We call this washout. We call this washout. What actually lives in this washout? It's your mud. When you drill, the mud actually lives in the well bore before casing. Okay? So your mud is living here. What's mud? Mud is either one of two things. It's either oil-based mud or water-based mud. Does oil have any hydrogen? We call it hydrocarbon, for God's sakes. So oil has hydrogen. What's the water-based mud? It's water, and water has hydrogen. So this means that the whole section here is full of hydrogen. Okay? Is this hydrogen porosity? No. This hydrogen is a washout. It's an extra hydrogen. It's not part of your formation. It's part of from where? It's part of from your borehole. Okay? So that hydrogen, if the tool comes in here, what will happen? It will see this hydrogen. And will it ask you if this hydrogen from porosity or not? It will not. It will consider this hydrogen as porosity. It will give you very high porosity. So the very high porosity that you see here, it has to have a good reason. The good reason here is that your well bore is not in a good shape. Your well bore is very highly washed out. If the well bore is very highly washed out, my tool, when it arrives here, it will read high. Let's just go on this. I actually shaded here between the 12 and a quarter. So all this zone is full of what? It's full of mud. Okay. Now let's just bring the tool. Here is the tool, and let's just log this well. If you log the well, you look up. Okay. I'm logging this well. It will read very good porosity at the bottom. When it reaches up, it will stand in front of what? It will stand in front of this washout. What does the neutron tool will see here? Will see hydrogen. Is this hydrogen part of the formation? No, it's part of the well bore. It's part of the washout. So the porosity that you see here, higher than 47%, is not because you have a porosity higher than 47%. It's because your neutron tool is reading extra hydrogen that has nothing to do with the porosity. Everybody's clear on this. So whenever you see anything beyond the limits, you have to go and find out what is the reason for this. Okay? And when you find out the reason, go fix it. We do something called borehole corrections or environmental corrections. You can correct for this effect on the neutron tool. Okay? Everybody understand now why the tool is reading higher than 47.6%? This is a very important thing to look at, right? Okay. Any question on this? Reem, any questions? Everybody's okay? All right.
We actually do have.
I can't hear you.
Ask, is the tool selected on the basis of I'm saying that the first question we have is if the logging tools are selected on the basis of the step previous to formation evaluation. I think what
the question is.
I think the question means that we choose the type of tools of the logging based on the course, on the result of the course from the exploratory well.
Okay. Actually, that's a good question. There are tools that we call our basic tools. I'll talk about this in next few slides. We call them the basic logs. Basic logs, it's what they call a triple combo. We talked about the triple combo before. Nobody actually drills a hole without having the triple combo, which is gamma ray, neutron, density, and resistivity. You find these in every single well. Okay, you have to, because these are the basic. These are the least expensive, and it has the most information. Okay, so you will never ever see any well that does not have the triple combo. There is no well that doesn't have neutron, density, and resistivity. Okay, unless you are in a field that has 1,000, let's say 1,000 wells, and now you know every bits and piece of it. Then you can correlate from the neighbor. But nobody does that. I can assure you, nobody does that. Everybody runs a minimum of the triple combo, which is the neutron, density, and resistivity. You add to this the gamma ray and the caliper. We call this the triple combo. If you add the sonic, as we talked about it in the formation evaluation, we call this the quad combo. So this quad combo or the triple combo, you have this in every single well. Now, there are some other tools we call advanced tools, like an imaging tool, dipole sonic tool, NMR tool. All these tools are extras. You run these tools when you need them. They are not a day-to-day. They are not a basic tool. They are not basic tools that you use, but you use them when you need them. Okay. But the triple combo is a must-have. It's almost in every single one. Right.
Okay. Another question we have, yes, is why porosity scale show negative 15?
Well, I put this actually, and let me answer this one at the very end, probably, if I have the time. I don't want to just spend the time on this. It's a long story. I tell you what, we have a review session. I will talk about this in the review session. Okay.
Okay, very good. We can go ahead and continue then with the.
All right. So now we understood now, when I see a porosity higher than the maximum porosity, find a good reason. You will always find the good reason is one or two reasons. The first one is the caliper. Okay, caliper is in bad shape. And again, I want you not to memorize this, guys. Don't memorize anything. Just keep in mind that the neutron tool measures the hydrogen. When the neutron tool sees very high porosity, it means it sees high number of hydrogen atoms. That's as simple as such. Find the reason for the high number of hydrogen atoms. One of the reasons is that the tool is seeing a big washout, and the washout contains mud. Mud is either oil-based or water-based. Both, they have a lot of hydrogen. Okay? Right. Okay. So to conclude from that part is washout shows fake porosity. It's not real. Washout shows fake porosity. Okay? Because there is no porosity higher than 47. There is no porosity even 47. Right? Okay. One more thing. First of all, let's just watch this. What's happening in here? Look at this. Look at this point. Sometimes now, if you are a good analyst, when it comes to be a good analyst, when you see thousands of wells, you start building your eyes will come to see things that probably nobody else will see. Yeah. Look at this depth, and look at that depth. Okay. Can anybody see these two depths? This depth, what is the caliper reading? 16 inches. What's the caliper reading here? Also 16 inches. Okay. So at these two depths, the neutron tool is seeing 16 inch of borehole. Excellent. So it should be seeing the same volume of hydrogen. Correct? Correct. But if you look at the porosity, you see this one is reading lower porosity than that one. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. If the reason is the hydrogen, then this one and this one should read exactly the same porosity. It's as simple as such. Okay. So you guys just want to open things, you have to look at every single depth. When you be a good analyst, you have to look at what's really going on in your well. Okay. If you look at these depths, as I said, they have the same washout. Why they are different in porosity? Why this one is reading lower porosity than that one? Okay. This one is even exceeding the 70. Yeah? All right. When you see this happening, when you see that the caliper is reading the same, but they are different in porosity still, okay, bring the gamma ray. So the gamma ray have a saying. So the first one to explain what's going on is the caliper. If the caliper did not resolve the whole issue, there is another log to resolve that issue, which is the gamma ray. Okay? What's the role of the gamma ray in here? Here is my gamma ray. Gamma ray is from 0 to 150. Gamma ray is reading very high in this zone and starting to read low in this zone. So this zone has lower gamma ray. This one has high gamma ray. This one has high gamma ray. So then my conclusion from this is this is a clay zone. Clear? This is a clay zone. Okay. What's the problem? What's the problem with clay? We need to stop here, and we really need to understand what is clay. All right? Everybody understand now? Once you brought the caliper is not answering all your questions. You have to bring the gamma ray. It will continue, and it will blot the whole picture for you. What's really going on? Okay? So what's the gamma ray? Gamma ray actually is the reason that you see high gamma ray is because of clay. We understood from the formation evaluation webinar that all clays, they have potassium and have thorium, and they are very high in gamma ray, and that's why you see high gamma ray in front of clay zones. Okay. What are the type of clays that we have? Well, in nature we have so many clay types, but in reality we have certain clay types that always exist in a formation. The first one, we call it L-lite. L-lite is the most common in nature and the most stable in nature. It means stable. It means it does not get much affected by the drilling fluids. So if you drill with water-based or oil-based, there is a stability in there. Okay? So the L-lite is a stable clay. The second type, we call it a smectite. Smectite comes from a huge family. Smectite is a member of a huge family. It's called montemolonite. The montemolonite is the big family of clays that the smectite is a member of this montemolonite. Okay, don't worry about these strange names here. But this is unstable, very unstable. If you have washout, you probably have smectite in there, and you drilled with the wrong mud. Okay, I'm very sure when you guys studied the drilling fluids, they talked about the borehole stability and how to choose the clay type for the proper borehole stability. Okay, so L-lite is one clay type, smectite is the second clay type. Okay, what is the third clay type? It's kaolinite. Kaolinite is another one, and to some extent it's stable. It's not as bad as the smectite. Okay, then the last one is the chloride. These are the four major. You see this almost in every formation with different percentage and different depositional environment. Okay, all right. So we have these four different types. Why am I actually talking about this? Because we need to look at the composition of these. What is the composition of L-lite? Composition of L-lite is so complicated, but watch this. It has hydrogen. So that's why you're talking about clay here. So clay has hydrogen. When the neutron tool sees this hydrogen, what it will do? It will read porosity. Is this porosity real? No, it's not. Why? Because not pores. It's actually a chemical composition of the L-lite. It doesn't have only one hydrogen. It has 8 of them. So every crystal, because all the clays are crystalline, every crystal of clay has 8 hydrogen. It's more than the water. It's more than the hydrocarbon. Okay. So every crystal of clay, it contains 8 hydrogen. What if the neutron tool goes in front of this clay? It will see huge volume of hydrogen. What it will do? It will read high porosity. Is this porosity true? No, it's not, because it's not pores. It's a chemical structure of the clay. Everybody understand that? If I go to the smectite, I can see something very weird. In the OH, I can see 4 hydrogen, but also I can see 4 molecules of water. So how many hydrogen actually in the smectite? You have 8 from here and 4 from there. Every crystal of smectite, it contains 12 atoms of hydrogen. Is this hydrogen in the pores? No, it's not. Is it part of the hydrocarbon? No. It's part of the water? No. It's part of the chemical structure of the clay. So when the neutron will read here, it will read very high porosity. Is it real? No, it's not real. It's fake. Okay? It's not real porosity. It's clay porosity. That's why information evaluation we call clay corrected porosity. Why? Because of these effects. Right? If you go to the kaolinite has 8 hydrogen. If you go to the chloride has 8 hydrogen. So the minimum for every molecule in every clay in nature is 8 hydrogen. So this means when the neutron tool gets closer to the clay, it will read very high porosity for no good reason. Okay? Actually, your actual porosity probably is 0, but it will read very high porosity because of these hydrogen components in this type of molecules. In this type of crystals. Okay? All right. So that's the second one. So where this one is here, let's just go and look at this. Here is the neutron tool. When the neutron tool started to log, actually we log up, as everybody knows, we log up. So when you go up here, it will, when it reaches that clay zone, it will read very high porosity. So the high porosity that we saw here is not because of what? It's not because of the washout only. It's because of the washout and the clay. Both coexist. That's why the porosity goes up to 70%, which is too high. This means you don't have actually any rock. If the porosity is 70%, what's the volume of the rock? It's 30%. That doesn't make any sense. You don't really have a formation at all in this case. Okay. All right. So the reason that the neutron tool, when you log this zone, it's affected by the hydrogen in the wellbore, and it's affected by the hydrogen in your clay. Okay. Will this explain what's happening here? Yes, it is. Let's just see how it goes. This one has the same caliper as this point, but they are different in porosity. What's your expectation? That the clay in this zone is less than the clay in that zone. It has to be. Why? Because if the clay in this zone is less, it will not see very high hydrogen added to the caliper. If the clay here is high, it will add high hydrogen component. That's why you see higher porosity. Let's just bring the clay. Here is your gamma ray. Okay? Here is the first point. Here is the first point. Look at the clay volume here. Look at the reading of the gamma ray. It's a low reading of gamma ray. Look at the reading of the gamma ray here. Look at the change of the gamma ray. Gamma ray is increasing going down. So the gamma ray here at this point is higher than the gamma ray there. It means the hydrogen component from the clay in this zone is more than the hydrogen component from the clay in that zone, and that's why it's reading higher porosity in this point more than higher porosity in that point. Okay, guys? So from this exercise, what I want you to do is never look at a log, just look somebody from the street coming and look at just a wiggling line. No, sit down, understand every single depth. If you do this once or twice, your eyes will get to see things that abnormal, okay? And your eyes will be trained on how to capture this abnormal type of behavior, and you need to explain it to be a good reservoir formation evaluation engineer or a petrophysicist. Okay, let's just apply this also to this point. What's happening in this point? I can see that the porosity is reading low. Correct? Is reading low porosity. If it's reading low porosity, it means you shouldn't see any washout and you shouldn't see any clay. Simple. So it has to be no washout and has to be a clean zone. Is that really true? Look at this. Here is no washout. Here is the zone. There is no washout in here. And look at the gamma ray. It's low gamma ray. So this one has no clay and no washout. That's why the porosity, look at this. Very low clay volume, no washout, low porosity. Very simple. Okay? So this means the tool is reading properly. But why the tool is acting this way? Because it sees what it sees. It sees hydrogen coming from the bad borehole and hydrogen coming from the clay component. Okay? Everybody understand that now? So when you actually look at the porosity, make sure you nail down the porosity properly, because nailing down the porosity is the most important thing in your reservoir. That's the container of your reservoir. Okay? So we agreed first in a washout shows fake porosity. Also, clays show fake porosity on neutron tubes. Then in this case, if you see the fake porosity, make sure you identify these two and you correct for both. Okay, fine. Any questions so far on how we look at logs and how we understand if there is any abnormal things that we are not expecting, any porosity that reads higher? When I see low porosity, why I see low porosity? I have to go and check the gamma ray, check the caliper, make sure that there's no washout. You have to be like this way in the way you look at your logs. Okay, all right. Now, fluid distribution in the pores. This is one of the reasons that's why I asked Dr. Ahmed for this webinar, because I had discussions with some of you guys on the emails, and I got disturbed with the way that you understand how the fluids actually reside inside the pore space. It actually scared me in some of these discussions. So bear with me, because I need to make sure you guys understand it fully. It's very, very important to know how the fluids are distributed inside your pore space, right? Okay. Basics. Okay, everybody know that. This is your body. And I usually say nature is the same. God created everything in the same way. Okay, so everything is related together, right? Okay. Here is your body, right? What do we call that part at the top here? We call it what? We call this throat. True? Okay. What is that part? We call this stomach body. This is the body, that's the stomach body that you have. Correct? True? All right. Actually, if you look at our pores, it's the same. You have pore body and you have pore throat. It's exactly like that structure. You have the pore throat and you have the pore body. Remember this. Just take this analogy. It's the same as the throat and the body. We have something called pore throat and we have something called pore body. Exactly like the throat that you have in your body and the stomach that you have in your body. Okay? When you actually chew your food, and the food will go from where? From your mouth, go through the throat to your body. Everybody clear? It goes through the throat. So the one that permits, look at what I'm saying here. The one that permits the flow from your mouth to go through your stomach is the throat. The throat is the one that controls and gives permission for the food to go from your mouth to your stomach. That's exactly what happens in our reservoir. The pore throat is the one that allows the fluid to go from outside to the pore body. So in the migration of hydrocarbon in your pore space, what is the part that controls the migration is the pore throat, not the pore body. Not the body. The body can be as big as it can be. If the throat is not allowing the food to get in, there is no way that your body will have any food. Very simple. Okay? Everybody see that analogy here. That's why we say permeability, which is the permission of the food to go to your stomach, is not controlled by the pore body. It's controlled by the pore throat. Everybody understand that? So the pore body, as big as it can be, it doesn't matter. The one that controls your permeability is your pore throat, not the pore body. Take this analogy with your body. If the throat is closed, eat as much as you eat. It's not going to go to your stomach. Okay? Everybody understand that? It's not going to go to your stomach unless you have a throat. And that's what's exactly in our rock. The pore throat is the one that controls permeability in our reservoir, not the pore body, not the volume of the porosity, not the porosity value. It's the throat of the porosity that controls permeability. Everybody understand that? You can see now this analogy. I hope you will never forget this, okay? Because this is very important. Okay. Now, originally, what was in the pore body? What was there? It's water. Did the water migrate to your pores? No. This water is coming from either the deposition happened at the sea, and the water got into the formation from the sea, or it comes from the rain, whatever it is. It's not a migration. It's at the time of the deposition. So the water did not reach your porosity originally, millions of years ago, because of migration. No, it's because of deposition, either by water rivers, lakes, lagoons, sea, rain, whatever it is. Okay? So it came here not by migration, it came here by environmental deposition. Okay? So the whole pore is filled with water. Okay? Now, my big question here, can you handle all this water the same way? No, I cannot handle all this water the same way. What do you mean by this? When I look at the water in my pore here, I have to look at the water as shells, layers of water. Why is that? Look at this. This water, actually, I have to look at it. There's a water that's at the boundary and the water in the bulk. These two waters are not the same. Okay, don't be surprised. These two waters are not the same. They are the same water, but they are not the same in the equilibrium in your reservoir. They are not the same on the forces acting on them. They are not the same. Why? Because the first layer is actually attached to what? It's attached to the grains. The first layer of the water is surrounded by grains. And once it's surrounded by grains, there is a big force that it gets created by this layer of water and these grains. Okay? We call this force, this is a big force here between the first layer of water and the grain. We call this force adhesion force. Okay, so what is the adhesion force? Adhesion force is a force that keeps the first layer of water attached to the grain as if you glue it to the grain. There is no way in nature that you will be able to produce this water. There is no way, forget it. This water will never leave your pore space. It will never do. Am I clear on this? This water that's close to the grain, it will never leave these pores. The one that can leave is the layer that's far from the grain. This layer probably will be the one that's easy to move. Everybody understand that? So between the grains and the first layer of water, we call this water is adhesed water. It's by adhesion forces. Okay. Right. So the adhesion force is the force between two different molecules. One is a fluid, the other one is solid. So what is the adhesion forces? A force between the fluid and the solid. It's as simple as such. So when you have fluid and the solid, the fluid will go on the top of the on the solid and it sticks to it with a glue. That's what the word adhesion is. So the adhesion looks like an adhesive force. It's a glued force. It's a force that glues the water into the grain or into the surface of the grain. Everybody understand that? So never ever think of this layer of water is simply like this water. It's not the same. They are the same water, but in the equilibrium is they're not the same. One of them can be easy to move and leave, and the other one will never move or leave. You know how much we know, how much in the lab that we can actually look at this water? One single way of doing this is to heat the rock. What will happen when you heat the rock? You actually change this water into vapor or steam. Then you can produce it. This is the only way. But by force, forget it. You will never be able to get it. Okay? Right. Everybody understand that? Now, let's look at this water, which is the same water, but it's far away from where? Far away from the grains. So, is this layer and this layer are also contacted? Yes, they are. Okay? But is this water different than that water? No, it's not different than that water. So the molecule here is the same as the molecule there? Yes. Okay. So is there a force in between? Yes. But this force, we call it cohesion force. So this is the cohesion force, is the force between the molecules in the same fluid. So we have two forces now, adhesion and cohesion. Cohesion, it's the force between the molecules in the same fluid. Everybody understand that? And what is the adhesion? Adhesion is the force between the fluid and the grain. Clear? Everybody understand that? So don't ever look at the distribution of the fluids in the pore as one unit. It's not one unit. It's layers. Layers based on what? Layers based on how far or how close from the grain. How far the fluid is from the grain and how close the fluid is from the grain. Now, when the production happens, which one of these layers will move easy? That one. Because it's very far from where? It's very far from the grain. So I have an adhesion force between the fluid and the grain, and the cohesion force between the fluid itself, layers after layer after layer. So the cohesion is the force between two similar molecules, water and water, for example. We call this a cohesion force. And adhesion force is stronger than cohesion force. That's why if you tried by all means to push this fluid out, that fluid will leave much faster than this one, and this one will never leave. This one will leave faster than this layer, and this layer will never leave your rock. Everybody understand that? Am I clear on this? So now see how the distribution of fluids inside the pore body is not one single water. No, it's the same water composition, but the forces on the water are different based on how close to the grains are, how far from the grains you are. Okay. Okay. Now, here is the adhesion forces. As we agree. We call this water wetting phase. Now we're talking about the wetting phase. So that's why we started looking at the distribution of fluids. Okay. So the distribution of fluids inside your pore, without talking about hydrocarbon, that's even at the start, before the hydrocarbon migration. These forces exist before the hydrocarbon migration. We call this water that's very much close to the grains. This is the fluid that's wetting the grains, as if you are actually just spreading the water on the surface of the grain. It's wetting the grain. So that's why we call it, this is the wetting phase. And we call it wettability. So we call this one is a water wet. What do you mean water wet? Means the layer that's close to the grain is water. Can this layer be oil? Yes, we can talk about this later. But originally, all the rock is water wet. All the rocks are water wet originally. Okay? Okay. The change to oil wet or weaker oil wet or stronger oil wet, that comes later through some chemical reactions. Yeah. But originally, everything is water wet. Okay? All right. Okay. Now, remember this wettability thing? Here is the wettability that you study in the classrooms. I'm not sure if you guys understand this clearly or not. Here is the force. This force is surface water. That force between the surface and the water is what? This is the adhesion force. So the adhesion force between the surface and the water, okay, is the one that's identifying the wettability. What is the wettability? Now, if you have oil here and the oil is attached to the grains, we call surface oil. So you have a force surface oil, you have a force surface water. It depends which fluid is, and this is the general thing. But reality is different. This is reality. This is just a generic. Oil is attaching or water is attaching. Okay? Clear? All right. So that's why we look at this as the wettability. Here is the force of the wettability. There is another force here called water oil. Just leave this force for later. Okay? Leave this force for later. We talked about the wettability as the term used to describe the relative adhesion of two immiscible fluids to a solid, either water and surface or oil and surface, either one. We'll talk about this other force that between the water and the oil later. Okay? Everybody understand now what is wettability? Coming from this layer that's close, wetting the rock, close to the rock, and that creates the irreducible water as well. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, we call this water irreducible. Why do we call it irreducible? There is no way you will produce it. So this water stays with you all the time. So, for example, if you calculate water saturation as, let's say, 60%, you will never produce the 60%. You probably produce about 40% or so. What about the 20% extra? These are the 20% attached to the grain, and we will never produce them. We'll talk about this in a second. So we call this irreducible water. Okay, so that water is attached to the grain. We call it the wetting phase. That water is attached to the grain. It will never move. That water attached to the grain, that's why we call it irreducible water. So the irreducible water, the wetting phase, the wettability, all of them are related to the layer of water that's in contact with the surface, okay, which is contact with the grain. Am I clear? Okay. Water you will never produce is that layer, and we call it irreducible water. Right. Now, hydrocarbon will start to migrate. Okay, hydrocarbon will start to migrate. What will happen when the hydrocarbons start to migrate? And we need to listen to this part very carefully, guys. Before we go on, Reem, do we have any question on the wetting phase?
We have many questions actually. Which of the layer is called connate water, grain and water layer, or water?
Connate water, irreducible water, wetting phase, All these are the water that's very much attached to the grain. All of this is the same name. All of they are the same layer.
Okay. What is the difference between adhesion force and interfacial tension?
That's I'm going to talk about this in a second. I said there is a force here. Let me go back. This is the force here. That's an interfacial force. I'll talk about this in a second. I said there is another force. I will talk about it in a second. Okay, so I will cover this one.
Perfect. We can move forward then.
Okay. All right. So now we talked about this force, this water, which is the wetting phase, the one that has the adhesion forces with it, and it will never leave. We call it irreducible water. We call it connate water. Connate water can be all the water, but this one is the water that's not going to be produced from the connate water. Okay, clear? Right. The water that you will never produce. All right. Now, hydrocarbons started to get in. Migration of hydrocarbons. Okay, we need to actually understand this very, very well, guys, because that will take us to the capillary pressure. You see how everything now is related, huh? Porosity relates to fluid distribution, relates to migration later on, okay, and relates to the cap pressure that describes the migration of the hydrocarbon. So you have the hydrocarbon coming in. When the hydrocarbon comes in here, it has to go through what? To go to the body direct, or it has to go through the throat? It has to go through the throat. Okay, so the throat is the one that's gonna control. All right, the throat is the one that will control the migration of your hydrocarbon. Okay, okay. So you need what? You need to have certain type of pressure that will take your hydrocarbon from here to go inside your pore space. You need a pressure in there. Okay, that pressure you need is what the capillary pressure is all about. So the capillary pressure describes the pressure required for your hydrocarbon to get in your pore space. Okay, all right. Now to look at this, actually, that we call it the cap pressure or PC. To look at this, we actually always look at this type of cross plot between water saturation and pressure. Here is the pressure required, and here is the water. Why do we call it water saturation? Because originally the whole thing was water. That's originally. That's why the starting point is here, where it has 100% water. This is your starting point. Okay? Originally, that's nature came up this way. Migration came later. Hydrocarbon migration came later. So it came when the pore was absolutely filled with water. Not the same water. Okay? It's the same water in composition, but not the same water in forces. Okay? I'm just repeating myself to make sure you guys understand this. So when the oil comes in, which layer of water will be easy for the oil to move? It's going to be moving this layer? No. It cannot be moving this layer. Why? This layer has the strongest force between anything inside the pore space. This has the adhesion force. This layer will never be moved. That's why you call it irreducible water. You will never move this water by pressure. The easiest one is the one in the middle. Okay, that's why you see the hydrocarbon living in the middle of the pore, not in close to the grains. It will never happen. Okay, the hydrocarbon will never go and touch the grain, right? But later on, probably later on, because of some chemicals in the water at the time of the deposition, there can be some interaction that actually will remove this water by chemical reaction, not by pressure. Everybody understand that? So when the rock changes from water wet to oil wet, it has to be through a chemical reaction. Okay, that chemical reaction will remove this water and let the hydrocarbon get in. This is the only way. But originally, nothing was oil wet at all by nature. Okay, yeah, that's the process that comes later on for the hydrocarbon migration. Now, you need a pressure here for this hydrocarbon to get in. And I need you to pay very much attention to what's coming in here, okay? All right. Actually, the first step is to put a certain pressure called entry pressure. What's the entry pressure? I saw so many students actually, they don't really understand what the entry pressure is all about. Entry pressure doesn't mean that the hydrocarbon got inside the pore. No, it's not. And let's understand this very carefully, because that will define two things in our reservoir that many of you sometimes confuse them together. Okay? There is something called entry pressure. Entry pressure is a very little pressure that comes at the beginning. Okay? That's very, very small value of pressure. What this pressure actually do? Okay? Before I answer this, I will tell you that you do this entry pressure in your daily life. Always link between what happens here and your daily life. Exactly like we link the permeability with your chewing your food and going from your throat to your stomach. Exactly, the entry pressure is something you're doing every single day, by the way. Entry pressure does not mean that the hydrocarbon got inside the pores. What does it mean? I give you an example from here. See that door? Here is a door. That door is closed. Okay? And you need to get in this room that behind the door. What the first thing to do? You actually need to open the door. When you open the door, you apply a force, either by pulling or pushing. It depends on how the door works. Okay? So when you apply a force, you open the door. Are you in the room yet? No, you're not. Did you apply a force? Yes, you did. Is this force let you in? No, it just opened the door. Am I clear? We call this force entry pressure. So the entry pressure is the pressure required to break the layer, to break the barrier, but you are not in yet. What you did with the door, you actually pulled it with a force, and the force and the pressure are related, and the relationship is very clear. It's just an area. Okay. So the force that you use to open the door, you actually consume this force in opening the door, but this force did not let you in yet. You have to use another pressure to get in. Am I clear? Everybody understand this analogy? Okay. So the entry pressure, you are not in the room yet, but you just remove the obstacle, which is the door. Similar, oil is not in the pore yet, but you just remove the obstacle, which is the membrane between the hydrocarbon and the water to let you in. Okay, but you are not in the pore space yet. Am I clear? Right. Once we reach this point, we identify two very important parameters. The first one, we call it the oil-water contact. Here is the point where you have the oil water. You just broke the barrier, so you are in contact with the water. So the oil and the water are in contact. Not at this point. Never ever think of this point with the zero pressure. Never ever think this is your oil water contact. No, this is not the oil water contact. This is the free water level. So the point at the zero, at the minimum, we call free water level. This is where the water is there, okay? And the oil gets in, we call this is the oil-water contact. Oil did not get into the pore yet. Very important to understand the difference between free water level and the oil-water contact. Oil-water contact is just right after the entry pressure, okay? Right after the entry pressure. Everybody understand that? Clear? Okay. So once you do this, now when you increase the pressure, the hydrocarbon will start to get in, and this will replace the water. Which layer of water? This layer of water. You're not going to produce that water. You're not going to push this water out. Okay? And you continue increasing the pressure until you see the hydrocarbon is coming in the pore, and it replaces that part. So where does the hydrocarbon live? In the weakest forces in the pore. The weakest force is not between the grains and the water. No, you will never, ever, by all means, remove this water. This is irreducible water. This is irreducible water. What you will remove is the one that has the least. Remember, this one had what before? It had the cohesive force. And this one has the adhesive force, and the adhesive force is stronger than the cohesive force. That's why it's easier for the hydrocarbon to remove the bulk. That's why you see the hydrocarbon living in the bulk of the pore, not in closer to the grains of the pore. Everybody understand that? Okay. There are some water here, yet you could not push out. What is that water? Here is the, if you take an asymptote here, that will give you the SWI, which is the irreducible water. So we identified the irreducible water from the wettability understanding. It's the same thing when you do the cap pressure. They are both related. They both are related. So you have this entry pressure that will let you in, and will let you in to move the water that has the least forces on it, which is the bulk. You remove the bulk of the water, and the hydrocarbon will replace that bulk of the water. Will it replace this water? No way. No way. Okay. Actually, in the lab, when you do the retort, for example, to look at the fluids. What do you in the retort? You heat. The only way to get all these fluids out is to heat. Yeah. Or you do the Dean Stark, and the Dean Stark is the same way. You also heat. So the Dean Stark and the retort, they both heating. Yeah. The only way to get all the fluids out is to heat. But force, you will never get this all fluids out by force. It will never happen. Okay. So force will never be able to break the bond of the adhesive forces that you see right there. So we call this one SWI. Everybody understand that? Any questions so far? So this is the link between everything in the pore structure, pore fluid distribution, migration of hydrocarbon, which part of the fluid that the hydrocarbon will move, which part that you will never be able to move, either by pressure, by whatever. You will never move this water. That's why you call it irreducible water. Okay, you will never move that water, which is the blue water that you see right here. How about that water? This water can come with production. That's the one that you will produce later on. Okay, how can this happen? All right. Now, when I introduce the hydrocarbon in here, it will be in touch with what? With this layer of water. Correct? Now, remember, it was water all the way. Now, the hydrocarbon migrated. So the hydrocarbon is in touch with what? With water. Is this the same fluid? No, it's not the same fluid. Are these two different fluids? That's when the force called interfacial force. Two different faces, two different faces, let's put it this way. Okay? The interfacial force is the force between two different fluids. So how many forces do we have inside the pore space now? Three forces. You have adhesion between the layer close to the grain and the grain. You have cohesion between the molecules of the same fluid. You have interfacial after the migration between the hydrocarbon and the water that you didn't push out. Am I clear? Everybody understand these three different forces in there. That's the force when I looked at the wettability graph. This is the force between water and oil. It is exactly this force. Okay, between the phase of the water and phase of the oil, called interfacial forces. Am I clear? Everybody can see now the picture inside the pore space. Don't just go look at the pictures that on the 2D. That's exactly what's happening in your reservoir. That's the struggle between all the fluids until the fluids comes to something we call equilibrium. Equilibrium means all the forces will get in relaxation, components will cancel each other. Equilibrium means components on x-axis cancel to each other, components on the y-axis. If you looking at from the two-dimension point of view. Okay. Okay. So forces between two different fluids, we call it interfacial forces. Right. Okay. So forces inside the pore space: adhesion force, cohesion force, interfacial force. Three forces. Adhesion forces between the wetting phase and the rock. Cohesion force between the molecules of the same fluid, which is the water and by itself. Interfacial force between the oil and the water. These are the three major forces inside your pore space, and we understood them from the time of the deposition to the time of the migration of the hydrocarbon. Okay? All forces are at equilibrium. And sometimes some people they actually mention the word homogeneous. There's nothing called homogeneous in the pore space. There's no homogeneity in the pore space, guys. There is equilibrium. There are forces in the pore space. Regardless what the distribution is, once the forces are at equilibrium, this is a steady state. Okay? Where your hydrocarbon is at equilibrium. I'm sorry, the fluids in the pore space are at equilibrium. Nothing called homogeneous in the pore space. It's called equilibrium in the pore space. Am I clear? Okay. All right. What time is now? Maybe I'll go for the saturation with depth. Then we take a break after that. Rima, I'm just any questions that I need to answer?
We do have some. One of the questions we have is what is the difference between wetting phase and adhesion? It's rephrasing.
I'm sure if he's following me or not. Wetting phase, adhesion is the force between the wetting phase and the rock. Adhesion is a force. Okay, adhesion is the name of the force that glues the wetting phase to the grain. They are not the same thing, huh? Adhesion is the force, okay, that glues the wetting phase to the grain, right?
Okay. Concerning cohesion, to be exact, can we say forces between two different liquids? I think.
No. Two different liquids is not.
Are confused because of similarity.
Reem, I can't hear you very well. Reem, can you repeat? I can't hear you very well.
I was saying that maybe the confusion is due to the language barrier, that the wording are there might be confusing. So the question is concerning cohesion. To be exact, can we say forces between two different liquids? So the answer you sir said.
No, cohesion is the forces between molecules in the same liquid. Okay, all the molecules in the liquid are attached together by certain force. This force is the cohesion force. When you get two different liquids, then the force between the two different liquids are the interfacial forces. Okay, so the three different. Let me go back again to this slide. Adhesion is between the wetting phase and the rock. This is the force. Cohesion between the molecules of the same fluid, which is the water, or also there is another cohesion between the molecules of the oil. Okay, but between the oil and the water, two different fluids, we call this interfacial. Two different phases, two different type of fluids. That's why I call it interfacial force. Okay, so the cohesion is within the same fluid. Interfacial, two different fluids. Adhesion, a fluid on the surface. Okay.
Okay. Another question: does the entry pressure is the same as displacement capillary pressure?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. But that doesn't mean when we say I don't like to call it displacement for one reason. Some people misunderstand the word displacement. Displacement, they think of it as it's already in. No, it's not in yet. It's just still breaking the boundary between the water, which is the membrane. There's a membrane between the water because there are two different phases. Huh? And that membrane is just broken, but the hydrocarbon not in yet. Okay, which we call it displacement flow sometimes in the cap pressure. Yeah, that's true. Okay, that's it. Reem, are you still there? Hello? Hello?
Dr. Moustafa, I believe you should continue because Reem has some difficulties in the connection. So just continue.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So now we understood that the hydrocarbon started to migrate, and the migration actually got in there, okay, as a function of pressure. How about the saturation as a function of depth? Okay. Forget about the saturation from any other way. Let's just understand the saturation from the cap pressure. Here is the pressure. What is the pressure? Pressure is actually, if you look at the equation, it's H rho G. What's rho? Density. Go ahead, Yarin. Okay. So what's rho? Rho is the density. Which density? Density actually it should be delta rho, which is the difference between hydrocarbon and water. Forget about this. Let's just put out the pressure is H rho G. Any pressure can be a function of height, density, or difference in density, whatever, and the gravity. Okay. So this means if I know the pressure, I can convert it to height. This means from the cap pressure, I can actually find saturation. For example, if I look at this pressure I go there, intersect with the cap pressure. Cap pressure will tell me this is SW1. What does it mean, SW1? First of all, this is your water saturation in the pore space. SWI is the irreducible water. So how much is producible water you will have? You will have SW minus SWI. That's the water that you can produce or you will produce. Okay, put it that way. SWI you will never produce. So when the cap pressure give you, let's say 40% water saturation, if there is about 10% irreducible, then the producible is 30%. So the water saturation that we get from other tools is actually fooling us because we think this is the water that we will produce. No, part of this water saturation is not producible, it's irreducible. Which one that can tell us this piece of information is the cap pressure. That's why understanding the cap pressure is much more important than calculating water saturation from the other logging tools. Okay? You have to understand it first, that the water saturation from the logging tool does not give you that differentiation. The one that gives you that differentiation of how much of this water is producible and how much of this water is not producible, is or unproducible or irreducible, whatever you call it, the cap pressure will give you that. Now, if I go with another height, okay, this means if I increase in the height, what will happen? Now SW2, water saturation is less. Part of it will be irreducible. Which part that will be produced? This part will be produced, but the SWI will never be produced. So from the cap pressure, I can actually calculate water saturation as a function of height. Okay. Now, I'm sure if you guys study this in the reservoir characterization or not. In the reservoir characterization, there are so many equations that actually takes height and transfer it to water saturation based on the capillary pressure curve. Okay. All right. So now we can see the link between the height and the pressure. Height, you can get it from the logging tools, which is the depth. Okay. And the pressure is from the cap pressure. You can get this relationship between the capillary pressure and the height above the free water level. Okay.
So we have a question that was asked more than once about the maximum width of the logging tool measurement to evaluate the porosity around the well borehole.
The maximum what?
The maximum width of the logging tool, like the depth of penetration.
Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean width? You mean the depth of investigation?
Yes, this is, I think, what's meant. The depth of investigation to evaluate the porosity around the wellbore.
Yeah, see, it differs from one tool to the other, but you can say in the average is 6 inches maximum. Okay, some of the tools can go about 7 inches, which is the without going to a certain company. But some companies use the high energy neutrons, which is a monotron. It goes to about 7 to 8 inches in the formation. But normally most of the tools actually is about 6 inches.
Okay, great. Another question is what's the difference between clay and shale, and how to differentiate between them on the log?
Okay. Actually, if you attended with me the 2 sessions, the first one was the formation evaluation, second one was the unconventional reservoir. I was very clear on this. I said all clays are shale, but not all shales are clays. The word shale means any rock that has grain sizes below 0.004 millimeter. So if you have sand, or you have lime, or you have dolomite that has grain sizes below 0.004, we call it shale. And because all clays have grains less than 0.004, that's why we call all clays shale. So all clays are shale because they fit the criteria. What is the criteria? The grain size is less than 0.004 millimeter, okay? But that means that if I have sandstone, the sandstone normally is not really clay, it's a sandstone or limestone or dolomite, but the grains are so fine that they are below 0.004, we call this sandstone shale. That's why shale gas and shale oils are not clay. Shale gas and shale oil are normal reservoir, limestone, sandstone, dolomite, but the only difference between the normal conventional reservoir is that the grain size of these type of reservoirs is below 0.004 millimeter. Okay, right?
Okay, great. We have a lot of questions about the graph.
Which one? The
so
cap
if we
pressure?
can, yeah, so if we can real quick discuss it again.
Oh, the cap pressure graph. What are the questions? Can you just at least say one of them?
Like one of them is pointing the. Find it.
Just read one of them. Just any one of them.
Yeah, because the entry pressure, capillary pressure. Yeah, a lot of questions. They just want to know what's the relation pressure, height, and water saturation, for example.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I will come to this one later also as well when in the upcoming few slides. But as you can see, I put this equation. The PC, or the pressure, is H rho G. This is the relationship between pressure and height. PC, any pressure is H rho G. Okay, H is the height, rho is the density, G is the gravity. G is constant because it's the gravity. H is changing because it depends on which fluid you're talking about, or a mixture of fluids. Okay, sometimes we use delta rho instead of rho, which means the differences between the two fluids, because in the pore space, we actually get two pressures, one coming from the hydrocarbon, the other coming from the water. Okay, I don't want to go through into a lot of details in this, because that will take a long time to talk about this and to talk about the capillary tube and all that kind of stuff. It's a long discussion. I just want to make you sure guys, that you know that the pressure and the height are related. This is after you identify the fluids becomes a constant. This is a constant. So in this case, the pressure and the height are very much related. The relationship is the rho and the G. And again, once you identify the pressure or the two different pressures, then you can identify rho or delta rho. Okay, and you identify G, which is the gravity. These are two constants after the identification. The one that's changing with the pressure will be the height. That's why we all say that there is a distribution of fluids above the free water level. I'll talk about this in a second. Right? That will be clear the relationship between the height and the pressure. Right? Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions will be answered.
Okay, let me go for the water saturation calculations, and it will be clear now with the relationship. Okay. Sure. Okay. Now we talked about the cap pressure, and we said the cap pressure actually simulates what happens as a migration of hydrocarbon into my pore space, and the struggle between the hydrocarbon getting in, pushing the water out. Okay, and that requires certain type of pressure. We call this capillary pressure. And it has to break the boundary at the beginning with the entry pressure or displacement pressure, as somebody mentioned that. It's the same thing. I prefer to call it entry instead of displacement, because the word displacement is sometimes misinterpreted as it's already displaced. No, it's not displaced yet. It will displace after that pressure. Okay. Right. So how do we measure hydrocarbon using logging tools? Logging tools, now in the pore space, we have hydrogen, and I'm sorry, we have hydrocarbon and we have water. Okay. Now we need to look at how we measure the difference between water and hydrocarbon. We agreed in the formation evaluation webinar is that we use the resistivity as the one that differentiates. Why? Water is conductive, hydrocarbon is resistive. Now, if I measure the resistivity, if I see high resistivity, this means more hydrocarbon. If I see less resistivity, it means more water, because water is conductive. Okay, so that's why we measure resistivity as something that relates to hydrocarbon and relates to amount of water and amount of hydrocarbon in the pore space. Okay, so the physics of the tool is conductivity. Water is conductive, hydrocarbon is resistive. This means if I measure the resistivity, I can differentiate between how much of hydrocarbon exists and how much of water exists. And we will discuss this in details when we talk about Archie and what Archie did to figure this out. Okay. So the rock resistivity, we said if you have a piece of rock, originally we always take things from the beginning, before the migration of the hydrocarbon and after the migration of the hydrocarbon. Before the migration of the hydrocarbon, the whole thing was filled with water. We all agree on this. Hydrocarbon comes later. Okay, so originally everything was filled with water. So now if I put a voltage and an ammeter to measure the current, then knowing the voltage, knowing the current, then I can say I can calculate the resistivity in this case using Ohm's law or using the electromagnetic wave as we talked about it before. I'm not going to repeat this and actually go to the previous webinar to see the differences. But the current is voltage over resistivity, or resistivity is voltage over current. If I measure the current from the ammeter and remember I have the voltage, I put the voltage in between, then I can calculate the resistivity. If hydrocarbon migrated later on, then what will happen to the resistivity? It will increase. So knowing the resistivity from being high or low, it will actually relate that did the hydrocarbon move or it didn't move at all. Is there hydrocarbon in this zone or there is no hydrocarbon in this zone? Okay, by measuring the resistance. Now, if the hydrocarbon exists, then the current will decrease and the resistivity will increase. Right? To understand this, let's look at the log, because we need to link things, guys. Okay, we always study the rock properties, which is the capillary pressure. That's a rock property. Okay, migration inside my rock. Right? How the logging tool will relate to this. That when you get under the link between what you see from the logs and what you see from the rock, the rock properties. Okay, let's just look at this log. Here is a log, we call it triple combo. To the guys who were asking about what is the minimum logs that we use, is the triple combo. Triple combo, you have resistivity, neutron, density, and gamma ray. Okay, but as we discussed before, don't ever start looking at any logs before you make sure the logs are correct. Remember that? When we looked at the previous log, we saw that porosity is exceeding 70%. And that doesn't make any sense. We tried to find out why this is happening. We found out this is happening because of the washout. So which tool that gave us that information is the caliper. So before you put your hand in any calculations, be smart. Make sure that your logs are correct. Okay, so the first one to look that your eye should be looking at, not anything but the caliper first. You have to examine the caliper first. Now, here is my caliper. Okay, that's the caliper. Is there any washout in here? No. Now I am confident that there is no washout. There is no borehole effects on my logs. Now I have a confidence in this log. If I see washout, I need to do what we call environmental corrections. Either the service company will do it for you, or use your software to do the corrections. Okay, there are available tools and softwares that can do these corrections for you. Okay, so before you start any interpretation, make sure that your logs are corrected. If you're lucky and your driller is a good driller, and he kept you he gave you a very good well bore, like exactly what's in this example, And you can see this is a straight line, no washout whatsoever. So this is a very good hole. So this means the logs are very good logs. Okay, so this is the first thing. Make sure that the good caliper, then you have good data. Simple. Before you start doing anything, don't jump to calculations. I know we all like equations. Equations are not really the most important part. It's the understanding how this data will give me the answer. The answer will be questionables or it's correct answers. Okay. So the first thing is caliper. I made sure now that the caliper is doing well and my data is in a good shape. Right. Second thing is the gamma ray. You start with the gamma ray. Is the gamma ray high or low? The gamma ray here is very low. It means I don't have clays. It means the porosity that I have are real. Because remember, the fake porosity comes from two sources, from the washout and from the clays. We discussed this earlier. So the washout and the clays give me fake porosity that I need to correct. Right? Now, I looked at my gamma ray. My gamma ray looks very low. This means I don't have much clay, so I can trust the porosity. Everybody understand that? So the zone doesn't have much clay. It's a good zone. Okay. Now, you go and look at, so the clean formation, and it's a good zone. Now, here is my porosity from -15 to 45. Okay. So where is my zero? Here is my zero right there. Is my porosity above zero? Yes, my porosity is above zero. Do I have porosity in this reservoir? Yes, I have porosity in this reservoir. So this is the second step. After you look at your reservoir, is it good reservoir? Yes. Doesn't have much clay? Yes. So it's actually a good reservoir. Does it have porosity? Now, here is my zero porosity, okay? And my pores are above zero. So I have good porosity in there. So I have porosity in my reservoir. Okay, so that confirms that I have porosity in my reservoir. Okay, now we need to look at the resistivity later. Resistivity, is it high resistivity? Yes, it is high resistivity. So this means I have hydrocarbon there. You can see, guys, at the beginning, before you start calculating anything, make sure you understand how to evaluate. Caliper is in good shape. Clay is very low. I have good porosity, I have high resistivity. That's an excellent zone to look at. Good potential of hydrocarbon zone, right? Okay. Now, once I do this, so I have a hydrocarbon in here. Now, let's look at this zone. Let me look at the bottom zone. What's the bottom zone here? Is this resistivity high or low? It's low resistivity. Low resistivity. What actually causes the resistivity to read low? Water. So this is a water zone. Simple. This is a water zone. Why? Resistivity is very low compared to that resistivity. Excellent. What happened in this zone? It's going now from the low, which is the water, going gradually increasing until it reaches the high value there. What is the variation? Variation is because of the position. It can be, the position is not one lump thing. It happens through millions of years. So it goes back and forth. Okay. So this is the transition zone. So there is a transition between what? Between the water and the hydrocarbon zone. We call this zone transition zone. Everybody understand that now? Now by looking at my log here, I found out a good zone, and I found the water zone at the bottom, and a transition zone between the water zone and the hydrocarbon zone. That's the normal you see in reservoirs. Okay, that's the ideal thing you see in the reservoir. Let's just relate this to the capillary pressure, because it's very important to understand that. Now let's just put the cap pressure in here, right? So you can see now how I link between the rock properties and the formation evaluation. How this link is there. Okay, here is my cap pressure. We identified in the cap pressure two very important parameters. One of them we called it oil-water contact. Exactly. That's at the end of the displacement or at the end of the entry pressure. And one we called it free water level. Okay. Where are these on my logs? Remember, there is have to be a relationship between the cap pressure I have and what's in there in my logs. Okay, where is your free water level and oil water contact? Oil water contact happens at this point. There is a transition between oil and water. Here is exactly where you can see the hydrocarbon, and you can see the transition, and you can see the water. So where is the oil water contact? At this point. Not at this point. This is not an oil water contact. This is the free water level. Everybody understand that? So at the beginning, before the transition, that's your free water level. After the transition, that's your oil water contact. Don't ever confuse these two. Okay? Don't take anyone in between as an oil water. No, that's not an oil water contact. It's still in the transition. You still get the oil starting trying to get in the pore. Okay, so that's your transition zone. You can actually take this height and you convert it to pressure to understand what's the displacement pressure or what's the entry pressure that you require for the hydrocarbon to enter your pores and redisplace all your water in there, and it stays in the bulk of the pore. So this is your free water level, and this is your oil water contact. Okay. Now, when you measure the resistivity, any questions so far between the relationship between cap pressure and the logs? Okay. Now.
No, it's very clear.
Excellent. Now, how we measure the water saturation from the logs, and I need you guys to pay much attention because we need to understand what did Archie do. Archie is a smart guy, right? We need to see how did this guy do it. You know how did he think about that? Okay. To really understand what Archie did, I know that all of you know Archie equation, but I don't know if you guys know the history. How did Archie do this? How did he come up with this equation? What was the line of thinking that Archie did? You have to read Archie paper to see what did he do. Okay, he did it in the 40s and the 50s actually. Okay? All right. So Archie actually said we have 3 different resistivities in any reservoir, not one single resistivity. Okay, what are these resistivity, Mr. Archie? He said, first one is RW. What's RW? He said, this is the water resistivity. What do you mean by water resistivity, Mr. Archie? It means don't measure the water in the rock. So what do you mean by don't measure the water in the rock? He means take a sample of the water outside the rock, put it in a glass and measure the resistivity. So this is what RW is all about. RW is not water inside the rock. You have to extract the water outside, and you measure the water resistivity, not the water and the rock resistivity. So RW is the water resistivity. Take a sample of the water, either by produced water, or you go down with a formation tester or whatever, take a sample of the water, do whatever. Get a sample of your water. Take the sample to the lab, and the lab will measure RW. So RW has nothing to do with the rock. I need to make it clear to everybody. RW has nothing to do with the rock. RW, take the water sample out and measure its resistivity. Am I clear? Everybody understood this? So that's what RW is all about. Okay. Then he came up with something else. He said RO. What's RO? He called it, this is original rock resistivity. What do you mean by original rock resistivity, Mr. Archie? He said before the migration of the hydrocarbon. What do you mean? It means now bring a piece of rock that's saturated with the water. Now the resistivity of the rock with the water is RO. Everybody understand that? So our original before the hydrocarbon migration, this is the original piece of rock. The migration of the hydrocarbon came later. Originally, it was not this, there was no hydrocarbon in there. Originally, it was rock and water. Water now is inside the rock, not outside. If the water is outside, we call it RW. If the water is saturating the rock, we call it RO, which is the original resistivity. Everybody understand that, the difference between RW and RO, okay? Okay. Then he said there is another one called RT. What's RT? This is the true resistivity. What do you mean by true resistivity? This is the current resistivity. It means after the migration. After the migration, now you have rock, water, and hydrocarbon. So now we have three different resistivities. One, water sample outside the rock. This is RW. Water saturating the rock, representing the original case before migration. Now, water and hydrocarbon in the rock, representing the current status, which is the true resistivity. Okay. So why you call it true? Because this is what the tool will measure. Okay. How many resistivities we have in nature? Three: RW, RO, and RT. And he actually put a bracket here, and he said this before migration. This is the first case, before hydrocarbon movement. This represents after hydrocarbon movement. Everybody clear on this? Okay? Because that's the way he thought about things. See how Archie did it? It was very smart. Huh? It didn't come out an equation like we normally say, it is Archie equation. The guy did a lot of work. We'll see how he did it. Because if you know how he did it, you will never forget. Okay? So he looked at the cases before and after. Before the migration and after the migration. So what did he do? First of all, what is the relationship between water and salinity? What does the salinity do? What does the salt do to the water? Salt decreases your water because salt water is more conductive than fresher water. Okay? Actually, fresh water is very resistive. To make the water conductive, you have to add salt to it. Okay? Okay. So salt water is conductive. Okay, how much conductivity does it have? Well, the more salt you put, the more conductive it will be. Then RW is a function of amount of salt in the water. But understand that. So RW, which is what is RW again? I'm repeating myself over and over. Water sample outside the rock. Has nothing to do with the rock. Okay? It means your water has salinity in it, has salt in it. Now you can calculate the resistivity. So NaCl, which is the salinity, sodium chloride, lowers the water resistivity. The more salinity you put, the less the resistivity it will be. Is there an equation I can use? Yes. Here is RW at room temperature. It means why it's at room temperature? Because you will take the sample, you send it to the lab. The lab will measure it at room temperature, not at the reservoir temperature. The sample will be measured at room temperature. This equation came as the resistivity of the water at room temperature. That's when you do it in the lab. You take the sample, you send it to the lab. Okay? It's a function of S. What is S? This is the salinity. S in ppm, part per million. For example, you say my formation salinity is 50,000. So S here is 50,000. You put a 50,000 here and you do the calculation, gives you RW. RW at what? At room temperature. Everybody understand that? So if you need to calculate what the guys in the lab will measure, here is the equation. You know how much salinity do you have? You plug it in this equation, put the salinity in part per million, not 100 km, but you put 100. You put 100,000 because it is in ppm. So S here is in ppm. You put 100,000 here, you calculate the RW at room temperature. What will happen if salinity increases? That part will decrease and RW will decrease. It goes with what we are increasing salinity, decreases RW. Very simple. If you increase the salinity, your RW will decrease because the water will be more conductive and its resistivity will go down. It will decrease. Everybody understand that? Okay. So this is the first one. If I know the salinity of my reservoir, I can calculate RW at room temperature. But actually, our reservoir is not at room temperature. As our reservoir is deeper and it has higher temperature down there. Now, you take the room temperature resistivity and you convert it to resistivity at the bottom hole temperature. How can I do this? Okay. So this equation is what? Is at room temperature. Okay. Room temperature is normally 75 degrees or 77, whatever it is. It depends where you measure it. Okay. How about temperature? What does the temperature do to your water? Will the temperature increase your resistivity or decrease your resistivity? Actually, it will decrease my resistivity even more. So the salinity decreases my resistivity. And also temperature decreases my resistivity. Okay? So what really happens? If you understand what is the resistivity? Resistivity is impeding the flow of the current. Correct? Resistivity means it's an impedance to the flow of the current. Okay? Now, what is the current? Current is a movement of electrons. We all study this in physics. Current is a motion of electrons. Okay? Now, if I increase the temperature, what are you doing to the electrons? You're giving the electrons more energy. Temperature is energy. Okay? So you're giving the electrons more energy. If you give the electrons more energy, do they run faster or slower? They run faster. When they run faster, the current increases or decreases? The current increases. When the current increases, what happens to the resistivity? It decreases. Okay? You just take it a step by step. Temperature will heat the water. Okay? Electrons will have higher energy. Electrons will move faster with the higher energy. Move faster means high current. And I have this equation. Resistivity is voltage over current. If the current increases, what happens to resistivity? Resistivity will decrease. Very simple. So the temperature decreases my resistivity. So salinity decreases my resistivity. Temperature decreases my resistivity even more. So when they measure the resistivity in the lab at room temperature, my expectation is that downhole it's even lower. Is there a way to calculate how much resistivity change because of the temperature? Yes. There is an equation here that tells you. Here is the resistivity that you calculated at what? At room temperature, right? You know the room temperature? Yes, 75, 76, 77. You know the temperature at the bottom hole? Yes, 200. So you know all the equations. I know the resistivity at room. I know the temperature of my room. I know the temperature of the bottom hole. Okay? Now I can calculate my temperature at the bottom. Very straightforward. Two very simple equations. One will calculate the resistivity because of the salinity at the room temperature. Second, we'll take the room temperature resistivity, convert it to downhole temperature resistivity. Okay? Two very, very simple equations that you calculate the resistivity downhole. Okay? So what did Archie do? Archie did a very smart thing. Let's just go one by one to see what did this guy do. Okay? First of all, he actually started with the first thing before the migration. Yeah, to really to see how things are related, let's just see what happened before migration first, then what happened after migration, and just see how they correlate. Okay? So what he did, he brought actually water, okay, and he brought a piece of rock that has certain porosity. Okay, so he brought a rock with certain porosity, and he brought the water, right? And he started injecting the water inside the rock. Everybody understand? Now he has RW. RW is what? Is the water resistivity outside the rock. Now he injected the water in the rock. So he created what? He created RO, original. He created RO. Okay? Then he started saying this is the situation. SW is 100%, no hydrocarbon movement. That's the first. That's before the migration. So he did the experiment, what really happens before migration. Then what he did, he actually looked at what is the ratio between RW and RO. He get the ratio between RW and RO. Okay, so he brought the water, he charged the water or saturated the rock with the water, and he calculated the ratio between RW over RO. Okay. Then he started to change the water. How can you change the water? Add some salt. When you add some salt, you change RW or you didn't? You change RW. So that's what he did. He added some salt to the water, so he changed RW. He cleaned the rock and he started saturating the second water. Okay, so now you had RW1 and RO1. If you change RW1 to RW2 by changing salinity, you will get RO2. He looked at RO1 and RO2, he changed the salinity. Here's the water, this is the second water. He actually injected the second water in here and he calculated RW2 over RO2. You see the steps he did. Took a set sample of water, he actually charged the rock, and he calculated the ratio RW1 over RO. See how this ratio look like. Then he changed the water. He saturated the rock again with the new water after cleaning the rock. He calculated RW2 over RW2 over RO2. He kept doing this actually over and over. RW3 over RO3. He found something very interesting, that these ratios are the same regardless how much water, how much salinity in the water you have. The ratio between the injected water and the resistivity of the rock with the injected water, this ratio is constant, and he called it F1. Everybody understand that? He could have found that the ratio is the same. If the ratio, let's say, is 0.1, so it's 0.1 here, 0.1 here, 0.1 here, regardless how much salinity you put. Because every time you change the salinity here, your RO will change. Change the salinity here, RO will change. You change the salinity here, RO will change. Okay? Then the ratio is the same. He said maybe that may be because of the porosity. So what he did, he actually repeated with the rock with a different porosity. Look at how he thought about this. Okay? He said maybe the porosity is the reason. So he actually did the same. He brought a different rock with a different porosity. And he repeated the same waters, RW1, RW2, RW3. And he calculated RO1, RO2, RO3 for the different porosity. And he also found it's the same thing. Even if we change the porosity, RW1 over RO1 is exactly RW2 over RO2 and equals to a certain value called F2. It's not the same F1. It's a different, but it's still the ratio is the same. So F1 is not as F2. Is there a relationship? He said yes. He found that F1 is actually A over Phi1 to the power M. Okay. Does this equation fit F2? He said yes. F2 is A over Phi2 to the power M. So now he found something very interesting, that the ratio is constant and it correlates to porosity with two parameters. One is called A and the other is called M. Okay, one is called A and the other is called M, right? So he concluded that the ratio is a function of porosity. The ratio is a function of porosity with two parameters. He called the first parameter M, called it the geometry, because the porosity is different by the deposition, how the grains are connected together. That's why he called it geometry or cementation exponent, how the grains are cemented together. Okay, so M is called cementation exponent. Why? Because the grains, they have to be cemented together in a certain arrangement that controls the pore shape. Okay, so M is controlling the porosity value and the porosity shape. He called it the cementation exponent. How about the A? He said, when I did it on sandstone, it was different from limestone, it was different from dolomite. So A is lithology dependent. A is lithology dependent. So he called it lithology factor. Okay, so this is a lithology dependent. This is a cementation dependent. So one describes the different lithology. The second describes how the grains are cemented together to produce your porosity, which is something, if you really think about it, that's true. There are two things in my piece of rock. What type of rock I have? Is it limestone, sandstone, dolomite? And at the same time, how the pores are connected together. So he created two factors. One relates to the lithology he is using, and the second one relates to the deposition, which is the cementation. Okay, and he found that M is around 2. I'm not going to talk about this in details because M has a bigger range than this. We study this in the reservoir characterization, but for the time being, let's assume it's around 2. How about A? He said A is 0.6 to 1. 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 goes to sandstone, siltstone. A goes to limestone and dolomite. So there is a range. That range depends on the lithology that you have. Okay? So he identified that the F is actually A over phi to the power M. A and M, one of them is what is the lithology of the core that you're using. M is what is the how the grains are cemented together to create my core structure I have. Okay, so that's before the migration of the hydrocarbon. Then he started looking after the migration of the hydrocarbon. See how he thought about this thing. That's why we started looking at things before and after. Every time you have to look at before and after, okay? What happened after the migration? He said, okay, in this case, in my experiment, I have to inject 2 fluids. I have to inject water and hydrocarbon. So he brought the water and he brought the hydrocarbon. And he started injecting both in the core, okay, with different volume. So that he knows the volume of the water he injected and the volume of the oil he injected. Okay, so now when he actually injected both, he's now generating RT, not RO, because RT is the true resistivity. RT is after the hydrocarbon migration. Okay, so he used RW and RO before the migration. He used RW and RT after the migration. Okay, and what did he found? Here is the situation. First of all, SW is less than 1, SO is greater than 0. Okay, and the sum of the SW and SO has to be 100% for sure. He actually measured the volume of water, which is SW1, and he measured the RT1. So he put water and hydrocarbon. Now he can calculate the water volume. Okay, SW. SW is the volume of water over the porosity. Okay, so SW is the water he injected, and the rest will be the hydrocarbon he injected. Let's assume that SW is 50%. So he actually injected 50% water and 50% oil. If SW is 10%, he injected 10% water and 90% oil. What if SW is 80%? Injected 80% water and 20% oil. So that's what SW is. So injecting both at the same time, that the sum of both is 100%. Okay? So he measured SW1 and RT1. Right? Then he changed the water and he started cleaning, injecting water and oil again. And he calculated SW2, RT2, SW3, RT3, and so on. What did he find? He found that SW to a certain power is proportional to RW over RT. Okay? He knows RW. He measured RT. He found that RW over RT is proportional to SW to a certain power. What is this proportionality? We all that's in math. I can remove this proportionality and put a constant. SW to the power equals a constant RW over RT. To his surprise, that he found that this C is exactly the F. It's A over phi to the power M. See how he linked things together. He said, oh, the C is exactly what happened before migration. So before migration controlled after migration. Before migration controlled after migration. So he found that SW to the power N is a constant times RW over RT. What is that constant? He found that the constant is exactly F. That F that we used before, which is A phi to the power M. So he took that C and he put A phi to the power M. He came up with his equation. SW to the power N, F RW over RT, or his equation SW to the power N, A over phi to the power M, RW over RT. That's how Archie thought about his experiment. That's how he came up with his equation. That's how he produced that equation. Very smart. He actually did exactly what happened in nature. Before the migration, after the migration. Then he linked both together, what really happened before and after, and what is the relationship between the two situations. Okay? Then he came up with his equation SW to the power N if ARW over phi to the power M RT, and that's the link between before and after hydrocarbon migration. I hope that everybody understand now how Mr. Archie looked at things and how this type of scientists think about things. They think about how naturally these things happen, and they start thinking of the start and the end of the natural process and how they link these things together. So Archie didn't come up with this equation out of nowhere. The guy did so many experiments until he came up with that very interesting equation that everybody using this equation, regardless of even his background. We all know Mr. Archie, and Archie's equation is very, very, very well known. Okay? All right. So what is N? Because N is the exponent of what? Of SW. What's SW? Saturation. That's why he called it saturation parameter. So the N, he called it saturation because it's SW. It's SW to the power N, so water saturation. Why he called the M cementation? Because this is how the grains are cemented together to create the pore. Why he called the A lithology? Because A changes from limestone, sandstone, dolomite. He didn't name things out of nowhere. He named things for a reason. Okay? So M is a cementation exponent, how the pores are connected together, how the grains are cemented together to get my pores. What's N? N is exponent of the saturation. That's why you call it saturation exponent. What is A? It depends on lithology. You call it lithology exponent. Okay? Right. So N is called the saturation exponent. Yeah, so that's Mr. Archie's equation. Okay? Let's go now back to that example. And if I told you that, go ahead and calculate SW at this marked depth. All right? Now, what is this marked depth? What is what do I need to do? I need to know RW. He gave me RW is 0.1. I need to know A, M, and N. A is 1, M is 2, N is 2 to make it easy on you. Okay? Now, where is my Mr. Archie equation? Here's my Mr. Archie equation. What do I need to do? I need to know N. He gave it to me. I need to know A. He gave it to me. I need to know M. He gave it to me. Excellent. I need to know RW. He gave it to me. So what's left? I need to know my porosity. I need to know my RT. Where then can I get these two from the triple combo? This is porosity right here, and this is resistivity right there. Okay? So I need to find my resistivity at this point. Here is my resistivity from 0.2 to 2000. Okay? From 0.2 to 20, and so on. So if you look at this, if you read them, it will be about 40 ohms. So the resistivity is about 40 ohms in here. How about my porosity? My porosity here is about 15 pu. When you actually put porosity in Archie, it has to be in decimal, not in percent. Huh? So it's 0.15. Now, if you plug all the parameters in here, SW to the power N squared, A is 1, RW is 0.1, porosity is 0.15, M is 2, and RT is 40. If you do the calculation, about 33%. So in this zone, it's 33% water and 67% will be hydrocarbon. Will I produce all this water? No, sir. You're not going to produce all this water because part of this water is irreducible. Okay? Remember this. That's the link between cap pressure and what you get from the logs. From the logs, you get the total water. You cannot differentiate. How can I differentiate? By looking at the cap pressure. My rock holds that amount of irreducible water. Then you need to subtract this from the SW to look at possible mobility of your water. When I say possible, I need to be careful about this point because it's a lot. Yeah, it's not just a very simple subtraction. Okay, all right. Any questions so far? Any question, Reem?
Yes, doctor. We have one question. Can pure water resistivity be similar to oil resistivity? And in that condition, how can we differentiate using the resistivity log?
Actually, God was so nice to all of us. There is nothing in nature called pure water without any salinity. Yes, there are some fresh water. That's true. Okay, there are some reservoir with fresh water. That's true. That's a fact. But there is nothing called zero salinity. So you're not going to see any water in our reservoir that has the same resistivity of the hydrocarbon. Okay, it will never happen. But you will see water with very high resistivity. In this case, you cannot use resistivity in calculating your water saturation. You have to use some other means to do this, because there is a tool that we use in both open hole and cased hole. It's called carbon oxygen. There is no room in this presentation or this webinar to talk about cased hole logging. But if you have fresh water, okay, either to use Oraby's method, which is just recently published, that you use non-Archie water saturation. Actually, I put this on Facebook as well. It's just published in the Journal of Exploration and Production. It's I called it non-Archie water saturation. That goes exactly to answer that question. Okay, and in this paper I discussed how the carbon oxygen sometimes fails for some reasons, but if the carbon oxygen fails, there are ways of calculating water saturation without the need of Archie equations. Okay, all right. That's just published actually a few days ago. Right? So, but if you want to go for a certain tool, there is a tool called carbon oxygen. Actually, we run it in cased hole. We can also run it in open hole. It's not very highly recommended in open hole because of the invasion effect on the carbon oxygen tool. But it's a long story. But there is a certain tool that can actually handle fresh water reservoirs. Okay, resistivity tool is not going to be useful at all in this case. Either to use Oraby's method or to use the carbon oxygen method. Okay.
We're feeling very lucky that we're not only learning from the best, we're actually learning from the one who makes science. So I'm pretty sure everyone in the presentation here, then just go on Facebook and find out more about Oraby's method. So
yeah, it's just published
in the. Thank you so much, Doctor.
No problem. Okay.
Great.
So what does Archie actually? Go ahead.
No, I was just saying we can go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So what does Archie actually model miss? Archie, he put the basis of everything, okay? He put the basis of how to measure water saturation. That's the basis. But actually, he made it so simplistic. Why? Because he doesn't want to go through other parameters that may change. That like exactly the question that was asked here. What if the water is fresh? Archie didn't go into that direction, okay? Because Archie he said, what are the odds? What are the odds of having very fresh water? Well, 1% of the real wells that we would drill, yeah, probably. Okay, the RW variation, it has other things in the EOR. If you guys studied the EOR, the enhanced oil recovery, it actually, if you inject water with different salinity, that gives you a different story. But anyways, Archie, when he did his work, he avoided the other factors that may affect his equation. So his equation was the ideal simplistic equation. One of the disadvantages that Mr. Archie has is that look at his Archie equation. Okay, there is no clay in there. Is there any rock in nature that doesn't have clay? No, every rock has clay. Actually, there is no rock at all that doesn't have clay, because clay is the cementing material. Okay, for example, if you build your house, you build those bricks, but you put cementing between the bricks. You're not gonna arrange the bricks over each other and leave it that way. It's not gonna stay for more than one day probably. So the same thing with rock is actually built. It was built and cemented by the clay. So the clay is a cementing material. Okay. So there is no rock in nature that doesn't have clay. They vary. Some of them has very high clay volume. Some of them has very low clay volume. Okay. It depends on the grain size and so many other factors in the deposition time. Okay. So, but Archie assumed no clays whatsoever, and that's a very bad drawback about Archie. And that's why Archie was the first one to use, but in reality, that's the first pass. But you have to go and find out the other more accurate models to include clay content in this case. Okay. For example, here is a situation where I don't have much of clays. Then Archie will be perfect. Here is the situation, I have too much clay. So Archie will never work. So Archie will work here. It will never work there. Okay? So we have to have ways of calculating saturation if I have clay that exists in my pore space. Okay? All right. So Archie works only for clean formation. Very low or zero. Zero is not practical. I'm just saying this for the sake of Archie. Nothing called zero clay. Okay? Very low clay content would be the best description in this case. Very low means 5%, 10%, that's okay. Above 10%, try to find something else other than Archie, because Archie will be overestimating the water saturation. Okay? Let's just take a look like this one. Now I have two zones here. Okay? I have two zones here. I have resistivity and I have resistivity here. And now, where can I apply Archie where I cannot apply Archie? Look, for example, this zone. Look at the gamma ray. Gamma ray is low or high? It's very low gamma ray. So if it's very low gamma ray, it means my clay content is very low. So I can use my Archie here, and I will be very comfortable using Archie. Okay? How about this zone? This zone, the gamma ray is high. It goes between high and low. Even this is low gamma ray, but still high clay volume compared to this one. Okay? So it will be exceeding 20%. Right? So I have high gamma ray here. Then that's not the place for Archie. Archie will fail in here. Okay? So when you apply Archie, be smart, because nothing in Archie called V clay. There is nothing there is called V clay. Okay? So that's why people started to look at the clay effect. Okay? We need to introduce the effect of clay on the saturation. Okay? Clay is conductive. So a minute here. Clay is conductive and hence reduces formation resistivity. Who said that the clay is conductive? Let's just go back to the clay and find out. Okay, everybody understand that? Never ever memorize anything. Let's just go and understand what's going on with the clays. Okay? Here it says the clay is conductive. Okay? Why clay is conductive? We have to understand this. We cannot take this as is. Let's just go for the clay. Look at the clays. Here is the composition of the clays. I can see aluminum here. Is aluminum a metal or just something that's not conductive? Aluminum is conductive. You can see aluminum here and aluminum there. You can see sodium. You can see aluminum. You can see iron. Okay? You see aluminum. You see aluminum. You see iron. You see aluminum. All the clays, they have metallic components. What does the metal do to electricity? It actually conducts electricity. So that's why clays are very conductive. So clays are very conductive because of the metallic components in the clay structure. Okay? So clay is so complicated. It has so many effects that if you are not taking this into consideration, you may actually provide false interpretation of your reservoir, and you will not be able to look at your reservoir properly. Okay? So clays are conductive for many reasons. For example, look at the smectite. What does the smectite have? It has water. Water is conductive or resistive? Conductive. So water is conductive. Aluminum is conductive. Iron is conductive. Sodium is conductive. All these metallic components makes the clay conductive. That's why in front of clay you see a reduction of resistivity, not because of the water, it's because of the clay component. Mr. Archie does not have clay component in there. So any reduction in resistivity to Archie is what? Is water. That's why Archie overestimates water saturation. Because everything in Archie equation, when you see low resistivity, it refers to water because he didn't consider clay. Okay? Now, if there is clay, you have to remove that effect first. You have to remove the effect of clay before you calculate saturation. Everybody understand that? Because the low resistivity when you have clay, not because of the water. The low resistivity when you have clay because of the conductivity of the clay, because of the metallic components of the clay, because of the water component of the clay, not the water component in the pores. Okay? Okay. So many actually came up with correction. So the correction will be correcting for the water component of the clays and the metallic component of the clays. Okay. The one who did this actually was one example. There are so many saturation equations. Mr. Simondov. Yeah, I like Simondov because it's a very straightforward. You can see, look at Simondov equation. It's complicated, but it uses the same thing. It uses RW. Okay. It uses A. What is A? That's the parameter of Mr. Archie. So he uses Archie parameters. So he actually took Archie equation and he changed this. There is a paper by Simondov. Simondov did this in almost 1989 or so. So he came up with that equation. So you actually have RW, you have A, you have phi, you have M. All are these what? Archie parameters. Okay. What is VC? That's a V clay. So that's the addition that Simondov did. He actually introduced the clay volume. What's RC? Resistivity of clay. How can I, the clay volume, you guys, I'm very sure you studied this in using gamma ray and calculating clay volume. I'm not going to go through that. What is R clay? The resistivity of the clay. How can I get this? It's very simple. You go to the highest clay volume on the gamma ray and read what the resistivity is reading. For example, if the gamma ray is reading 100, that's 100%, let's assume this is 100% of my clay. Go and read the resistivity. Resistivity in front of 100% clay is the resistivity of the clay. Very simple. You can get actually this from the law. So the volume of clay, R clay are known. Okay. Now you apply this equation. Okay. Then you calculate the SW for the zone that contains clay. Okay. I will leave you with something very interesting here, and I want you guys to work on this tonight. Go for Simondov. What if I put V clay of Simondov equals to 0? Simondov has to actually get reduced to what when I put V clay equal to 0? If I put V clay equal to 0, Simondov has to be Archie. So I'll give you this as an exercise. I always give this in my classes. Prove that Simondov becomes Archie if the V clay equals to 0. That's how Archie. What did Archie do? He didn't consider any clays. So in Archie, V clay equals to 0. Then Simondov, if he is correct, if Simondov is correct, then if you put V clay equal to 0, Simondov equation will be transformed to Archie equation. Try to do this in you know, whenever we have time to go and work on this exercise. Okay. Any question on saturation before we move to permeability? I need to talk about permeability a little bit.
No.
Probably I'm not going to be able to. No questions?
It's pretty clear now. Nothing.
I think many people actually slept already. Huh? So.
No, people are focusing, and I think many of them are impressed.
Okay, permeability. What is permeability? Okay. We have 3 different permeabilities, guys. We have absolute, we have effective, and we have relative. Okay, we need to make sure we understand the difference between the 3: absolute, effective, and relative. Okay, okay, one by one. Remember this this slide. Okay, permeability is controlled by pore throat, not the pore body. This means if I have this pore, which is phi1, now I have another one which is phi2. Which one is bigger than which? Phi1 here is bigger than phi2, correct? Or phi2 is less than phi1. Okay, but what is the pore? How is the pore body? Pore body of 2 is less than the pore body of 1. Does this mean that the permeability here is bigger than the permeability there? No, because the throat here is bigger than the throat there. That's why K2 is less than, I'm sorry, K2 is greater than K1. Porosity is less, pore body is less, but the pore throat is bigger. So the pore throat has nothing to do with the porosity value or the pore value. Okay, the pore body or the porosity value. The permeability is controlled by the pore throat. Pore throat can be big in the small pores. Okay, and pore throat can be small in the big pores. Okay, so then never confuse porosity with permeability. Right? Okay. So that's the pore throat here is bigger than that pore throat. That's why the K2 here is bigger than than K1 there, okay? I will prove you this to you. Porosity permeability relationship. Is there a relationship between porosity and permeability? We agreed that there is no global porosity permeability relationship. It doesn't exist. There is no relationship between porosity and permeability. It does not exist as global. Go ahead. Reem, are you asking any question?
No, sorry.
Okay. So there is no global relationship between porosity and permeability. But relationships are dependent. We actually try to find relationships. We try to find relationships. The one who started this is Cousini. And let's just see what Cousini did. Again, all these guys are very smart scientists. They did things in a very smart way to give us the benefit of how we look at things. Okay, we understood what Archie did. Now let's just understand what Cousini did. Cousini did something very, very critical, and he was the first one to put rules. How can we get a relationship between porosity and permeability? Okay, and he proved that porosity is not the controller of permeability at all. Okay, let me look at what did Cousini do. Cousini said, okay, let's look at this situation. I have a row of grains, actually, and another row of grains, a third row of grains. This arrangement is very clean arrangement. No different grain sizes, nothing. It's a very idealistic type of grain sorting. Okay. Now, if the flow started to move in, okay, it's the best way to go is to go for the shortest distance. The fluid will go from this point to this point in a straight line. Okay, it's not gonna go either right or left, or it's not gonna change it because there is no hindrance. There is nothing that stops the fluid from moving into certain direction. So it will actually go for this distance from this point to that point. And this is for sure the shortest distance. You called it LS, the shortest distance. So the shortest distance is the distance where there is no hindrance, no obstacles, nothing that stops the fluid from going in a certain direction. Okay, that's good. Then he said, look at this arrangement. In this arrangement, he started looking at adding some other obstacles here, which is some other grains that has less size that actually goes and get placed in between the grains. Okay, that's a deposition that happens actually in nature. In fact, this is more realistic than this. And then he said, okay, let's just follow. If the fluid goes from this direction, what will happen? He will try to move here, but he cannot continue moving in this path. Why? It's blocked in here. So he has to go like a maze. He has to go and find a different direction. It goes this direction, then it keeps moving here. Then he finds this obstacle. It's not gonna go this way. It's go up there. Then it goes to the left. It finds this obstacle. Then it goes up. Then it goes to the left. Is it a long distance or a short distance? That's a long distance. Okay. So he called this LA. So he has two distances. You're comparing between the maximum distance or the longest distance to the shortest distance. And he came up with something very interesting. He called it tortuosity. What is tortuosity? It's actually the torture. You torture the fluid. You actually force the fluid to take a long path than a short path. And the ratio between the long path to the short path squared, and there is a reason for the squared. I'm not going to go through this. You can actually go and find out why this is the square here. Anyway, it's the ratio between the long path and the short path, and he called it tortuosity. So what is tortuosity? It's the torture that you actually put on the fluid flow. The fluid flow is tortured because you're blocking the shortest distance. Okay, so the ratio between LA over LS, he called it tortuosity. And he said your permeability is controlled by the radius of your grain. You see, in a radius, there is a different radius. The radius of your grain, the porosity, and the tortuosity. Okay, this means the bigger the tau, if tau is big enough, or the higher the tau, the lower the K, which is very clear. If the tau is very high, it means the rock is actually having a very hard time to have a very long path until it gets to the outside. That's what the permeability is, going from one side to the other side. Okay, so this means tortuosity is what Cousini identified as the controller of your permeability. Let's just take an example here. Okay. Example one. Let's assume that I have a porosity of 30%, and I have R as 1 millimeter or whatever, and I have tortuosity of 100. And I have another piece of rock that has lower porosity, but it has the same grain size, but the tortuosity is 10. Okay, let's just apply this in this equation. If you put R1, phi is 30, tau is 100, you get the permeability as 37.5 millidarcy. Okay, how about this 20? If you apply here, the permeability is 250. Wow. So the porosity is less, but the permeability is more. So the porosity and permeability, they are never in a correlation. Okay. Sometimes you see a correlation. If you see a correlation, we call this well-behaving rock, and that's very rare in nature. You're lucky if this happens. Okay. I never seen this in my life except once or twice. Okay. So there is not really a relationship between porosity and permeability because it's all controlled by tortuosity. If you identify tortuosity, then you can actually have a good handle on permeability. Okay. There are some different shapes of permeability equation. People came after Cousini and start to look at the surface to volume ratio. I'm not going to go through this, but sometimes you see different formulas or different form of the Cousini, but this is mainly the Cousini equation. Some people started to change the Cousini equation as the surface to volume ratio because that's a factor. It's a very important factor, but I don't want to go through this anyway. Yeah. Any questions so far before we talk about the absolute perm?
No, it's pretty clear as well. But they're just saying that they're not asleep. This is the only
they're not asleep.
new comment we had. Yes.
Okay.
No one is asleep.
Okay. What is the absolute perm? Guys, word absolute means it's not natural. Exactly like what? Like the maximum porosity, ideal structure. Absolute means not real. Maximum. Okay. So what is absolute perm? The one who identified absolute perm is Mr. Darcy. So now we studied so many, Mr. Archie, how he thought about things, Cousini, how he thought about things. And actually, if you need to look at these guys, they did this for a reason, and they have their own line of thinking. You have to see how they thought about this. Okay. So what did actually Darcy do? Darcy did something very interesting. He said, I will calculate permeability that has only affected by rock. What do you mean affected by rock? It means, well, permeability is a combination of rock and fluids, right? So what do we want to do? I want to remove any effect from the fluid on the movement. Okay, let's just understand this a little bit more. If you understand how he thought about things, you will see he put actually conditions for the permeability to be absolute. Sometimes we memorize the condition, we don't understand it. We didn't actually see how Darcy thought about it. Darcy said, if you want to go for absolute perm, remove the other effects. What are the other effects, Mr. Darcy? He said, you're using fluids to measure perm. Okay. Now, to measure perm, you have to apply pressure. Then, if your fluid got affected by the pressure, then there is an effect of the fluid. Now, he said, my fluid has to be incompressible, will not be affected by pressure. Okay? Let's just see how he did that. No other factors but the rock. So what do you mean, Mr. Darcy? Said, here is my piece of rock. Okay, you put pressure 1 and pressure 2. You put delta P. Delta P will allow fluid. So P2 is less than P1, and this is your fluid coming from higher pressure to low pressure, so it will flow. Okay, so he said my rock has to be, first one, homogeneous. What do you mean by homogeneous, Mr. Darcy? He said no other outside factors affecting the structure of my rock. My rock is homogeneous, one single type of grains, and the grains are sorted in one single type of sorting. Don't mix things together. So Mr. Darcy, this is idealistic. He said, yes, this is an idealistic case. So that's why he called it absolute. Okay, only rock, no other factors, nothing whatsoever. Okay, so my rock is homogeneous, first of all. No reactivity between the rock and the fluid. So it means you can actually put a fluid that can make some reactions with the grain. No, if the fluid will make reaction of the grain, there is an effect of the fluid. Remove effect of fluids. So there is no reactivity between my fluid and my grain. See guys, that's why he put all these conditions. He wants to have permeability affected only by the rock. Nothing else. Don't get anything to be affecting my permeability. So if the fluid will react with my rock, that's not absolute. Forget it. Okay? That's another factor affected my permeability. So there is no reactivity between the medium and the rock. The rock is fully saturated with one single fluid. Don't tell me oil and water. No, one single fluid. Okay? And he said, now let's just talk about the fluid. It's saturated by one single fluid. What are the properties of the fluid? It's incompressible. It's not affected by the pressure. Because if it's affected by the pressure you exerted on the permeability to flow, that will affect the permeability. So second one is my fluid is incompressible, should not be affected by the pressure. He wants to remove any outside effect. That's why he's putting all these constraints. That's why it's an absolute perm. Okay? Laminar flow. It means when the flow goes inside my pore here, it goes into layers. No turbulence. No turbulent flow. Because if there is turbulent flow, that will affect the flow in my rock, that will affect my permeability. All the flows are going into laminar. Laminar means it's actually cylindrical shape, going through with a certain type of velocity for each layer, okay? Which is the laminar flow that I'm showing right there, okay? So the flow is not turbulent. It has to be laminar flow, okay? Third, the flow has a certain direction, perpendicular. It means the flow has to be perpendicular on the area. Don't consider the flow coming from another direction. They remove the other directions from the flow. Okay? Time dependence. Oh, don't allow the time to be a factor in my permeability measurement. Why? It has to be a steady state. So why he's asking for a steady state? Because if you allow time to change, then your permeability is affected by an outside influence. He wants to remove, as we agreed, any outside influence but the rock. So the time dependence, remove it. No steady state. Okay, I'm sorry, no unsteady state. It has to be steady state. Temperature. He said it has to be isothermal. What's isothermal? It's a constant temperature across the measurement. Don't tell me the temperature will change, because if the temperature changes, that will affect the flow of my fluid. Then that will affect my permeability. You see, all these. Actually, you guys, and I know that you memorize all of this. We don't know why he's doing this. He's doing this because he wants to have absolute rock only permeability. Okay, that's why he put all these conditions, right? Now, if you apply all these conditions, then your flow rate is Q, which is the volume of the fluid coming at a certain time, V over T. He said my flow, my Q, will be proportional to the area and proportional to the length. Okay, and he came up with this equation that the flow rate is proportional to area and proportional to length, proportion to the delta P. If it increases, it increases, and the viscosity of your fluid. If you use incompressible fluid, that would be viscosity will be incompressible will be water, and the viscosity will be 1. Okay. If you take this proportionality out, that's what the proportionality is. That's the permeability. So the permeability is the proportionality between the flow rate and the parameters. No time, no temperature, no turbulence, nothing. That's why he can put this equation in this shape only if this is the case. Okay, so this is absolute permeability. All right. Question: can I use gas to measure permeability? And I need you all guys to pay attention. I will actually will end with this one, and I think this will be it's 3 hours. Okay, gas flow. Say, okay, can I use gas? Well, if you use gas, what do you violate? Let's just look at the list. What did you violate? Compressibility. You violated the fluids. Correct? So if you use gas, you should not be measuring absolute permeability. True? We should not be measuring absolute permeability. Because Darcy said, to be absolute, my fluid should be incompressible. Is gas incompressible? No, gas is very highly compressible. But we still measure permeability with gas. How come we do this? Did you guys ever think about that? Okay? How can we use gas to measure permeability? Okay? A very smart guy came up with a very interesting idea. Okay? And actually he said, I will use gas to calculate absolute permeability. Okay? How can you do that? Gas is compressible. He said, wait and see. Let's just see how this guy's name is Klinkenberg. Let's just see how this smart guy did this. Very, very smart. Okay? Again, don't memorize things, understand how he did it. It's very important. How did he come up with this idea? So what do we violate? We violate the incompressibility. So gas is very highly compressible. Why we use gas anyway? We use gas because it's faster. If you inject fluid, it takes days to inject the fluid and come up with the permeability. Gas, seconds. I'm very sure you guys do it in the lab. You do it with the fluid, with the liquid, and you do it with the gas. Gas, it takes seconds. Liquid, it takes the whole day in the lab to saturate the rock with the liquid. Okay, so it's faster. It's faster than the liquid. Who started this? Mr. Klinkenberg, and he came up with a very, very, how he did it? He did it with a very smart idea. Let's just see how he did it. Yeah, because if we understand how he did it, you will say, that guy is really, really brilliant. Okay. All right. So what did he do? He said, well, I'll do the same thing, but I will use gas. Okay. Mr. Klinkenberg, you know that gas is compressible. Yes, I know gas is compressible. You're okay with this? Yes, I'm okay with this. We need absolute permeability. I will give you absolute permeability. Absolute permeability requires incompressible. I know that. How will you do this? Let's just wait and see. So what he did, he actually put a pressure P1 and P2, okay, for the gas to flow. He used gas P1 and P2. Then he calculated the average. Okay, P1 plus P2 over 2. Okay. Then he calculated the reciprocal of the average one by one. See how he thought about this. 1 over PM1. And he said, well, if I use P1 and P2, here is my permeability K1. And because the gas is compressible and it's a function of pressure, this means when I change the pressure to P3 and P4, I will calculate the P mean, and I calculate the reciprocal, I will generate a K2. Correct? So he's generating K1 and K2. None of these is absolute because they are affected by what? Affected by pressure. And Mr. Darcy said, I need incompressible to call it absolute. Agreed. That's why every time he changes pressure, he changes permeability. Very simple. Okay? He used it for P5 and P6. Did the same thing. Calculated the reciprocal and measured K3. Okay, until now, okay, he is agreeing with us that permeability is changing. I said, okay, now what you will do? He said, I will actually make a cross plot between 1 over PM as an x-axis. Look at what he did. 1 over PM. What's over P mean? P mean is P1 plus P2, P3 plus P4, and so on. 1 over P mean versus permeability. 1 over P mean starts from 0 to whatever 0.1 or 0.2, whatever it is, and the y-axis is permeability. Okay, so at 1 over PM1 there was K1, 1 over PM2 is K2. So he just started to plot these points. 1 over P versus K, 1 over P versus K, 1 over P versus K. Okay, then he said, look at this. There is a correlation here. Okay, and he said, look at this point. What is this point? Look, you see how smart this guy is. What is this point? This point means 1 over PM equals to 0. Correct? The x-axis is 1 over PM. So 1 over PM equals to 0. Okay. So what's PM in this case? 1 over PM is 0. So what's PM? PM is infinite. PM is infinity. What if you apply infinite pressure over gas? What will happen? When you apply gas pressure over gas, what do? You liquefy the gas. The gas will be changing to liquid. What if the pressure is infinite? This means the gas is absolutely liquid and is incompressible because you applied the maximum pressure ever. No more compressibility. You applied infinite pressure. So this point is actually a gas under infinite pressure. So it simulates what? It simulates an incompressible liquid. See how smart he is. He said, your permeability is not this one. Your permeability is not that one. Your permeability is this one. So read the permeability here. This is what Mr. Darcy wanted. Am I clear? Yeah. So see how smart this guy is. He did this in few seconds. You don't have to have liquid as Mr. Darcy required. 6 days. He did it in a very smart way. He made the multiple measurement, extrapolated to the point that actually, that's why he calculated the reciprocal all the time. It's a very smart thing, because if you do the reciprocal, when the reciprocal reach 0, this means the PM is infinite. You will not apply the infinite in the lab. You just extrapolate. You get it by extrapolation. Yeah. So in this case, this point represents gas under infinite pressure. Gas under infinite pressure is liquid, and it's incompressible because there is no more pressure to apply. So it's an incompressible fluid. So the gas in this case is exactly what Mr. Darcy wanted as incompressible fluid at this point where 1 over PM is 0. Okay, hey guys, I think I will stop here because I'm myself actually got tired. Right? Any questions so far? And before we end, I'm very sure it's actually 10.
Doctor, we thank you so much for all those informations and for allowing us to be up to date. Like 2 days ago, I think all the group here, they're very lucky to attend this webinar today with you.
Is there any questions, Reem, so far? I can answer 1 or 2 questions,
we have a lot of fans for you, sir, and everyone is asking for more and more webinars. So maybe we can send you the questions later on an email or something, because
or if can actually can collect them. Yeah, can collect all of the questions probably in the all previous webinars, so I can answer these questions in the Q&A session.